Chapter 398. When Chao Changqing and the emperor played chess, the eunuch bent down to hold the chess box. The empress saw the ribbon of the emperor's virtuous crown fall, so she reached out to help him fasten it. The emperor took pity on the 8 dippers of chess beside him, so when he saw this, he only smiled knowingly and was not angry at all. This beautiful story was passed down from falsehood. Later in the literary world, it was said that when Chao Changqing was drunk, he directly called the eunuch by his name and shouted for him to take off his boots. This made the scholars endlessly daydream. But this was something that could only happen in the West Chu dynasty. Today's imperial court, as well as most people's Jianghu, were far less poetic and picturesque. The great literati singing the song of the great river east with an iron pipa was undoubtedly heroic. But the common people who made a living on the river day and night would inevitably spit a few mouthfuls of saliva into the river when the harvest was not good. The corpses in front of the fish dragon gang, who failed to snatch the secret manual and lost their lives, were just like the old saying, when the hand raises the knife, the body will be carried away. Su Fingnian quietly dismounted from his horse and went to the corpses. He squatted down and rummaged through the corpses, as if he wanted to take advantage of the dead people's wealth. Lu Narong was originally a little embarrassed by the behavior of her gang members, but when she saw that the man surnamed Su did not care about the morality of Jianghu, she turned her head away. As for the words of the swordsman from the chess and sword music school, other than the shame and anger that she had to show to her gang members, her heart had already become numb. Whether it was Zhou Siru, who relied on his power to kill people, or this Beimang swordsman who relied on his astuteness to snatch the secret manual, weren't they all the same kind of people who looked elegant on the outside but were actually the same kind of people? She held a grudge against the man surnamed Su, but she accepted his straightforwardness more. At the very least, he never pretended to be a bad person. The lecher from the chess, sword, and music house was not stupid. Once he was done with his mouth, he started to run away. However, he had only run 70 to 80 feet when he was intercepted by someone. It was the gray-robed old man with an aquiline nose who had taken the initiative to return to the danger zone. The old man had a ferocious appearance and dark purple lips. He laughed and said, "Wang Weishue, in this game of cat and mouse, you're the one who used your mind the most. In the end, you're too smart for your own good. After I kill you, I'll take the green stallion and frame these Liang barbarians." When Wang Weishue saw the old man with a hooked nose, he did not show any fear. He took out the secret manual from his chest and laughed, "Old Immortal song, you must be joking. How is this cat and mouse? It is clearly a cat and tiger who overestimates its own strength. Before I left the chess and sword music school, my teachers told me to just borrow it from Old Immortal song and I will return it with both hands. I will not rob it. But if Old Immortal song is unwilling to lend it to me, I will return it to its rightful owner. There is no need for Old Immortal song to do anything. It is just that everyone in Jianghu says that Old Immortal song will seek revenge for the smallest grievance. I, Wang Weishue, am still young, so I am not sure if I have offended Old Immortal song." The old man in gray narrowed his eyes and said gloomily, "Since you are sensible, I will not kill you. Don't worry, I will return the green nightmare to you. Naturally, I will not be calculative with you. Speaking of which, I am of the same generation as your martial uncle, the sword of benevolence Wang Hafei. If I am not wrong, this green nightmare from the Wu family's sword tomb is what your teacher with an interesting name wants. Boy, don't worry, after I understand the swordsmanship manual, I will naturally go to your chess and sword music school and exchange it with you. Don't waste my time, give it to me." When Wang Weishue saw the ruthless look in the eyes of the notorious devil, he threw out the secret manual with an extraordinary origin without hesitation. After the gray-robed old man took it, he stuffed it into his sleeve without even looking at it. He stretched out his hand again and said with a hideous smile, "My good grandson, don't test my patience. If you don't behave, I'll take your life." Even if those people are in front of me, it will be easy for me to kill you before I leave. Wang Weishu smiled innocently. He quickly took out a page torn from the Qingfu sword code, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it to the Devil Dao magnate. Wang Weishu praised, Elder Song's foresight is amazing. Little tricks can't escape the eyes of an old immortal. Wang Weishu is impressed. The old man in gray rubbed open the page. After confirming that there was no mistake, his face changed, as if he was considering whether to kill this young man from the chess and sword music school. Wang Weishu stood in place and said innocently, Elder Song, do you want my martial uncle to come out early to talk about the old days? The old man in gray who had regained the secret manual touched his aquiline nose, and the haze in his eyes dispersed. He laughed heartily and said, Your grandson's temperament is quite different from the roddenwood of the chess, sword, and music school. It's a pity that he joined the wrong sect. If I saw him earlier, I might have taken him in and trained him well. Wang Weishu, who lost the secret manual, was even happier. He smiled and said, What a pity, Elder Song. It seems that I am not so lucky. The old man turned and left. His body was like an eagle and disappeared in a few jumps. Su Fengnian searched for a long time. Except for a few hundred taels of silver notes and a few porcelain bottles, he did not find a single secret manual. It seemed that these Jianghu people also knew that fighting for secret manuals was a matter of life and death, so they did not dare to take the really valuable things with them. The old man in gray who dared not to take the chess and sword music school seriously was obviously not a weak person. Judging by his lightness skill, he was firmly in the second class. If one did not have the ability to fight for such a person, one would not dare to join in the fun. Moreover, the most dangerous thing about fighting for secret manuals was to be on guard against attacks from all sides. When the spring and autumn period was still around, the martial arts world elected a leader who had both fame and strength. He led a large team of 400 or 500 people to fight against an old devil in the Finger Mystery realm. Killing the devil only cost about 100 lives. After that, ownerless treasures appeared and many people died. The leader was even chopped into meat paste by his peers. After the tragedy, there was still another tragedy. The leader's manor was turned into ashes overnight. His parents, wife, children, and servants all died. From then on, no one was willing to be the leader of the martial arts world. Wang Weishu, the Yu House swordsman who was destined to return empty-handed, slapped himself in the face in front of everyone. He then walked to the Fish Dragon gang and said shamelessly, Miss Liu, it is fate that we met. I want to go to Luqing. Can you lend me a horse to accompany you? If you don't have a spare horse, we can share one. Lu Narong was angry. Su Fengnian stood up and said with a smile, You can borrow my horse. Wang Weishu smiled and said, Do you think you are worthy? Su Fengnian smiled and ignored this swordsman from a famous family. He said to Lu Narong, I will go after that old man and see if I can find a master. The Fish Dragon gang looked at each other. This Su guy's face and courage were not inferior to that bastard Wang Weishua's at all. Chapter 399. After Su Fengnian finished speaking, he slowly walked towards the direction that the gray-clothed old man had escaped to. Gong Sun Yang, who was sitting in the carriage, looked at the back of this person and sighed. He then saw the handsome student from the chess and sword music school get on the horse after some hesitation and stick to Lu Narong's side. On the contrary, Gong Sun Yang's expression was calm. Su Fengnian passed a hillside that blocked his view. Just as he was about to rush forward, he saw the gray-clothed old man holding a small flying ant between his two fingers. The little thing appeared in the blink of an eye and disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was clearly a southern barbarian venomous insect. Seeing Su Fengnian's figure, the old man with a hooked nose crushed the small insect and sneered, Kid, playing with two ant-venomous insects in front of your grandfather, what a joke. Another flying ant appeared in front of Su Fengnian's eyes. It fell to the ground and struggled for a while before dying. When he was tracking Xiao Chang, he also relied on this venomous insect from Shu Xiu. At this moment, he looked at the gray-clothed old man and cupped his fist with a smile. I've heard of the Wu family's sword tomb's green grass sword embryo nurturing secret technique. It's very mysterious, so I wanted to borrow it from you. It'll only take a cup of tea's time and I'll return it after reading it. If there's any disrespect, please forgive me. After the gray-clothed old man crushed the venomous insect, he was still rubbing his fingers. After hearing Su Fengnian's words, he exclaimed in surprise, "Kid, you have a photographic memory. How's your qigong? If it's passable, I don't mind taking you in as a slave. In the future, we can sneak into the forbidden areas of Jianghu and find suitable secret manuals for you to memorize. This will save this old man a lot of trouble." Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. "You want to take Wang Weishue as your disciple, but why am I a slave?" The old man was straightforward. A green scorpion the size of a fingernail pierced through his skin and crawled out from the back of his hand. It raised a pair of small pincers and made a hissing sound. He sneered, "That kid's father is in charge of the military and political power of Beimang's Aquarius state. You only know a little bit of witchcraft. You're too far away from orthodox witchcraft. Tell me, who do you think you are?" Su Fengnian lowered his head and saw thousands of scorpions swarming over. He said helplessly, "But Senior Scorpion Gu is only an unorthodox method. It's far from being as imposing as the Jade Pipa of the 6 great Gu kings." The Tidewater scorpions trapped Su Fengnian in the middle. The gray-robed old man, who had been exposed, was not angry. He stopped the scorpions from moving forward and exclaimed again. This time, he was really surprised. "You know about the Jade Pipa, a great creation immortal item. Normally, the juniors who have some skill in playing with Gu would not know about the 6 great Gu kings. This old man has underestimated you. I thought you were just an ordinary rich kid. I didn't expect you to be so knowledgeable. Tell me, what's your family background? If it's enough to make even me feel apprehensive, I can lend you this dark green sword manual to take a look." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "I'd better not say it. I'm afraid you won't believe me." The gray-robed old man was unusually patient. He played with the green scorpion on the back of his hand and said, "Tell me. Grandpa is different from the rest of the world. The more unbelievable something is, the more I'll believe it." Su Fengnian said, "There's a white-haired old man surnamed Chu. He was chained to his collarbone by 2 blades. He taught me how to use the blade." The gray-robed old man frowned. "This old man has been missing for many years. When Chu was roaming the Jianghu, you were still wet in your pants. Don't lie to me." Su Fengnian's face was relieved. He smiled and said, "He's back in the Jianghu." The old man's face was gloomy. After a long time, he quietly took back the green scorpion. The scorpion tide also dispersed. He took out the manual and threw it out. After that, he scolded, "Kid, you're lucky. I have some connections with old man Chu. I owed him a favor in the past. When I see him in the future, I'll say we don't owe each other anything." Su Fengnian wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and stretched out his hand to catch the manual. The gray-robed old man suddenly arrived. He laughed and punched the chest of this young and inexperienced kid. "Kid, you're going to die from your stupidity this time." The next moment, the gray-robed old man suddenly stopped. He rolled his eyes and made a sound of surprise for the 3rd time. He only saw the young man with the blade fly out. His sleeves bulged. His punch was like a stone thrown into an ancient well. There were obvious ripples on his clothes before they finally disappeared. The young man who looked like a rich young man did not talk nonsense. He lowered his head and began to read the Qingfu sword manual. The gray-robed elder was not sure if this little guy was pretending to be exhausted, or if he was really safe and sound by some strange method. He was very confident in his cultivation, but he did not dare to chase after him. The atmosphere was very strange. Su Fengnian closed the manual and threw it back to the gray-robed old man. He smiled and said, "What a set of Qingfu sword technique. It's really mysterious." The sly old man in the Jianghu was afraid that he would die from his stupidity. When the manual fell to the ground, he realized that the kid in front of him had no intention of making a move. No matter how thick-skinned the gray-robed old man was, he was still embarrassed. He carefully bent down and picked up the Qingfu sword manual. However, he kept looking up and smiled. "Kid, you have a strong inner strength. I've been catching eagles all year long. Now that I've seen the peerless sword manual, you've only taken a punch. In the end, you have the advantage. Why don't we stop here?" Su Fengnian said calmly, "Either you held back your strength in your punch and did not kill. It seems like you do have some friendship with the white-haired old man. Or you're not in the second rank at all. You're just relying on your lightness skill and venomous insect art to make people afraid." The gray-robed old man laughed dryly. "I just don't have a good blade. Otherwise, I could kill a first-rank master, let alone a second-rank master." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Thank you for lending it to me. I'll take my leave now." The old man nodded and said, "Okay." Su Fengnian said, "Can you put away the green scorpion again? It's always going in and out of the back of my hand. You've lost a lot of blood." The gray-robed old man smiled and wiped the blood on the back of his hand. He put the scorpion back into his body again. Su Fengnian said, "You can leave first. I won't send you off." The old man smiled kindly and said, "You can leave first. This old man has been running day and night for a few days. He's a little tired. He needs to rest. You can leave first. This is etiquette." It's fine. You can leave first." "Senior," the scorpion crawled out again. It's being naughty again. Kid, don't take it to heart. It's not this old man's idea. If you don't leave, I won't leave. Kid, you're too pretentious. Since we're all in the Jianghu, we're all good men of the Jianghu. There's no need to pay attention to seniority and etiquette." The old man and the young man exchanged pleasantries tirelessly. In the end, the gray-robed old man sat on the ground. He glared at the young man who still had not drawn his blade. He was finally about to curse. Su Fengnian smiled and bowed. He said, "I'm really leaving this time." Looking up and staring at the slender figure, the gray-robed old man resisted the urge to sneak up on him. He slowly got up and patted his butt. He muttered, "Wang Weishue from the chess and sword music school is one thing, but this kid is not easy to deal with. There's no way I can survive in the Jianghu." Those who have read my Weibo will know how misfortunate this chapter is. Chapter 400. After Su Fengnian caught up with the fish dragon gang, the handsome young man from the chess and sword music school, who was quite good-looking when he was silent, rode on his horse carelessly, without any awareness that he was a turtledove occupying a magpie's nest. Su Fengnian did not care about this young man whose identity was revealed by the aquiline-nosed old man. He walked on the yellow sand road with Wang Dashi. Not long after, those Jianghu men who had been blindly chasing after the secret manual saw that Wang Weishue did not keep up with them. After thinking for a while, they regretted it and turned around to run wildly. Even the 6 swordsmen from the chess and sword music school caught up with them. After looking at each other, they could see the worry in each other's eyes. The corpse was still there. Seeing that there was indeed an ancient book with the cover of the Legend of Gongyang on the ground, one of them picked it up and flipped through it, jumping and cursing as he tore it into pieces. Seeing that they could not escape the end of the chase, the rest of them immediately scattered like birds and beasts. The 6 swordsmen from the chess and sword music school were even more puzzled. Could it be that Wang Weishue guessed wrong? Then why didn't this junior brother who was highly regarded by the sect follow them? Confused, the 6 swordsmen ran along the road. After catching up with the fish dragon gang, they did not know whether to laugh or cry when they saw Wang Weishue, who was riding a horse and sticking to the Beiliang girl. The eldest son of the Wang family in the Aquarius prefecture was really hard to change his habits. In the music house, he was also frivolous and liked to flirt with his senior and junior sisters. He even did not let a female martial ant go. If he had not been stabbed several times, he would not have given up. This time, the sect was determined to catch the demon who had the Qingfu sword code. The 7 of them were just the weakest force. The 6 martial uncles, namely Wang Weishue's master Wu Miaozai and martial uncle Huang, who was skilled in both sword and man, were the main force. However, the demon's whereabouts were uncertain and they were the first to encounter him. At this time, an unparalleled net had been cast at the border. It was just a matter of who could catch the big fish first. Wang Weishue pulled the reins and stopped. In front of his senior and junior brothers, he did not have the air of a disciple. After getting off the horse, Wang Weishue said, "The secret manual is real, but the demon is really slippery." He actually turned back. I could only obediently hand it over. Originally, I had secretly torn a page to use as bait, but he saw through it. The 6 swordsmen of the music house did not suspect that Wang Weishue had embezzled it. It was not that they were so open-minded, but they all knew Wang Weishue's identity. He entered the chess and sword music school not because he was greedy for the peerless martial arts. It was just that Wang Weishue was already famous in the chess world at a young age. Unfortunately, he rarely met a match and came to the music house to find people to play chess with when he was bored. When it came to swordsmanship, he was always inexperienced. Even his master felt sorry for his talent in swordsmanship. In the distance, firecrackers sounded in the air. It was not uncommon to use firecrackers to send messages. However, the chess and sword music school's firecrackers were definitely unique in Beimang. There was no need for his senior and junior brothers to remind him. Wang Weishue led the horse to Lu Narong and said with a smile, "Can I borrow some dry food and water from Miss Lu? When you come to Beimang and run into trouble, just say that you are guests of the chess and sword music school. If there are still people who deliberately make things difficult for you, it's okay. Just say my name, Wang Weishue, and most likely everything will be fine. As for whether you say it's my sister, or my wife, it doesn't matter." Lu Narong did not respond. She just expressionlessly asked the gang members to take out water bags and food. Wang Weishue and the 2 swordsmen took them with a smile and did not forget to bow with their swords. Their etiquette was not bad at all. They did not look down on the fish dragon gang because of their superior sect, nor did they take things as they pleased. Not only was Lu Narong surprised, but the members of the fish dragon gang were also full of smiles. They felt that they had gained a lot of face. Although they were in Lingzhou, Beiliang, they had also heard of the chess and sword music school. It was one of the top 5 sects in Beimang. What was more rare was that this sect respected law and etiquette. Many children of the princes and nobles were willing to go to the chess and sword music school to learn from them. Compared to them, the fish dragon gang was not even a match for them. Wang Weishue led the horse to Su Fengnian, who was next to the young Wang Dashi. He loosened the reins and took off the priceless jade pendant from his waist. He said with a smile, "I have never been stingy. I borrowed your horse to ride for a while. This snake wall is a reward for you. Don't pawn it or wear it casually. The shop can't afford the price, and it is easy for people to be greedy at the sight of money. Do you know what it means when an ordinary man has a jade pendant?" Su Fengnian gently took the jade pendant that was cold to the touch. He smiled and did not say anything. When Wang Weishue brushed past him, he said softly, the knife is not bad. When the chess and sword music school was far away, Lu Narong waved her whip heavily. Only then did the fish dragon gang wake up. Some of the gang members who were qualified to ride horses regretted that they did not ride a horse at that time. Snake Wall, just from the name, one could tell how precious this jade pendant was. Other than the Beimang royal family who could wear dragon and phoenix jade ornaments, snakes became the first choice of high-ranking officials and dignitaries. They were not fools. Just now, when the romantic swordsman and Miss Lu talked about their school and family background, it was chess and sword music school first and Wang Weishua second. This snake wall might be worth dozens or hundreds of gold coins. How much money did the fish dragon gang earn after traveling thousands of miles? But that guy's surname Su still pretended to be calm. Who wouldn't want to go up and slap him? Su Fengnian looked down at the jade pendant. It was the sixth snake wall. According to the law, it was an ornament that only officials of the third rank and above could wear. This Wang Weishua was indeed the son of a first-rank official in Beimang. It was almost on par with the Xianbei jade buckle worn by the woman with the mink forehead. Su Fengnian couldn't help laughing. This guy had his own style when he was young. But if they really wanted to compare family backgrounds, who was worthy and who was not? Seeing that the guy's surname Su was finally happy, the members of the fish dragon gang who peeped at him from time to time sneered. You brat, you took advantage of Miss Lu's horse to look ahead to reveal your foxtail. How shameless. The simple-minded Wang Dashi didn't think so. He just asked curiously, young Master Su, does Wang Weishua have a strong background? Why did he give out a snake wall as if he had a mountain of gold and silver at home? Su Fengnian put away the jade pendant and smiled. Almost. The teenager clicked his tongue. Su Fengnian suddenly asked, have you ridden a horse before? The teenager who was trotting under the horse shook his head and said, how could I? When I was young, I went to the lantern market and was trampled by a horse. Since then, I've been afraid of horses. Even if you let me ride, I wouldn't dare. The descendants of Bailiang officials and rich people, who didn't wear fancy clothes and ride horses in the market? If they didn't do it, they would be embarrassed to call themselves rich. Su Fengnian frowned. The teenager's mind was simple, but he had developed a keen perception of the surrounding atmosphere. He asked worriedly, young Master Su, what's wrong? Su Fengnian shook his head and said, I thought of something. Whether it's feasible or not, we'll see when we do it. The teenager who had changed from awe to respect young Master Su grinned and said, that must be something big. Su Fengnian smiled and looked into the distance. He muttered to himself, it's a pity that no one knows how to thank you. Under the scorching sun, the teenager was sweating profusely. He panted and said, young Master Su, I heard that the chess and sword music school has a very high status among the Beimang barbarians. The disciples are very good at chess, sword, and music. Even if someone from an ordinary family enters, they will come out looking like a young master from a big family. Su Fengnian teased, are you jealous? The teenager quickly waved his hand and said, no matter how good it is, it's still a school of the Beimang barbarians. I won't enter even if you beg me. Su Fengnian clicked his tongue and said, what a boastful tone. The teenager who was out of breath said bitterly, young Master Su, I can't talk anymore. If I do, I won't be able to run anymore. Su Fengnian nodded. He began to use his memory to search for information about Wang Weishua and the chess and sword music school. The number of provinces in Beimang was far less than that of the Liang dynasty, which had unified the spring and autumn period. There were only 8 provinces. The names of the provinces that had been passed down for hundreds of years had all been changed by the Empress of Beimang. They were Gu Sai Long Yu Dong Jin Shi River, Jin Chan Yu Toad, Baoping Ju Zi. Wang Weishua's old man should be the governor of Baoping province. He was an important official with real power in Beimang who completely controlled the province. Beimang had never divided the governor's authority, unlike the current Liang dynasty, where the governor and administrator kept each other in check. Therefore, if one became the governor of Beimang without any authority, one would only be laughed at. However, this kind of situation rarely happened. Those who could become the overlord of a province were all officials with great talent and bold vision. The Empress of Beimang had never denied her trust in these 8 officials. She spoke bluntly, far more than those children in the palace who were not familiar with her. Currently, of the 8 governors of Beimang, only one was from the royal family, and it was from Juzi, which was ranked at the bottom. Baoping province was the only land in Beimang with fertile land that did not lose out to Jiangnan in terms of military provisions. Although its territory was not large, the governor's authority in Baoping province was exceptionally heavy. The teenager, Wang Dashi, said that Wang Weishue's family was sitting on a mountain of gold. He really hit the nail on the head. Therefore, Snake Climbing Wall, which was worth hundreds of gold, was a drop in the ocean for the governor of Baoping province. Beimang's Jianghu was similar to its small number of provinces. It was far from the Liang dynasty, where hundreds of schools contended with each other. The connections and resources were mostly monopolized by the 30 or so big sections. The rest of the gangs were just struggling at death's door, stretching their necks to ask for some leftovers. Chapter 401. It was not easy for the chess and sword music school to be one of the top 3 schools among these behemoths. There were many talented people in the Yu House, and every head of the Yu House was a brilliant genius. There was almost nothing that they did not know, and they would often become the imperial tutors of the Beimang officials. Their status was even more respected than the head of ceremonies. The most interesting thing about the House of Chess, Sword, and Music was that no matter how many mouths it could feed, it would take in disciples based on the number of CI names in the world. Right now, there were 612 CI names in the world, which meant that the House of Chess, Sword, and Music currently had a maximum of 612 people. Only if a great literary figure created a new CI name and had a famous piece passed down would the House of Chess, Sword, and Music be able to add another person. However, the Yu House had already abandoned the use of CI names 64 times, and there were still a considerable number of CI names that would not be used easily. As long as no suitable person appeared to take the title, it would be left empty. Taking everything into account, the Chess and Sword Music School currently had no more than 500 people. It was no wonder that the children of the Beimang nobles who were as numerous as carps crossing the river wanted to enter this school as if they were possessed. Hong Jingyan, who was ranked 7th in the Wushu rankings for the first time, was from the Chess and Sword Music School. His CI name was Gung Lizi. This CI name was originally not that special in the Yu House, only ranked 4th in the middle. However, it was believed that after Hong Jingyan appeared, Gung Lizi would become the most popular CI name in the Yu House. If the next CI name was not a great talent who did not lose to Hong Jingyan, there would be no way for them to take the title. Su Fengnian counted on his fingers. There are 5 first-class CI names, and they have been passed down for hundreds of years without any changes. For the 2-word CI name, Han Gu takes first place. For the 3-word CI name, the Command of Peace and Sword Aura are tied. For the 4-word CI name, the Divinator Slow takes first place, and there is also a bronze figure Zulu Pan. In the past, the Prefect of Peace had always been the Great Prefect, and the Prefect of Sword Qi had always been the Prefect of the Sword Prefecture. The prefects of the Chess Prefecture and the Yu Prefecture had no particular requirements when it came to their names. However, the previous and current Taiping decrees were not able to become the Emperor's preceptor. The reason was that after the Empress of Beimang ascended the throne, she once reprimanded the Taiping decrees to his face. Since ancient times, the sacrificial rites were arranged according to heaven and earth, the monarch, the parents, and the teacher. The lonely one had no parents to kneel and worship. If you think you can stand shoulder to shoulder with heaven and earth, then you can become the Emperor's preceptor. These words were indeed spoken by an emperor. It sounded very domineering. However, the imperial decree of peace did not become the imperial preceptor, and the current Han Gu became the crown princess. It could be considered a slap in the face and a date. Beimang's own top-notch master, Broken Spear Wang Mao, ranked 4th in the Liang dynasty, belongs to the 4 pillars of Jianghu, far more than the chess and sword music school. However, the school closest to the Beimang Palace is still the chess and sword music school. Beimang borrowed the strength of the young leader of Wudong Mountain in the south and Li Chuangong's sword that broke 2,600 armor to create a new ranking that included masters from 2 dynasties. However, because one of them was killed and the other was seriously injured, they did not make it onto the ranking. They were suspected of burning the bridge after crossing the river. The Liang dynasty had always complained about the ranking of their own dynasty, but this time, most of them were convinced by the ranking made by Beimang barbarians. The first place was Wang Xianji from Wuwu City, the second place was Tuoba, the undisputed number 1 in Beimang's army, and the third place was Dong Tai, the peach blossom sword god. Next was Hong Jingyan, who had been dormant in the chess and sword music school for 20 years and finally made a name for himself. Qiao Changqing, who had entered the imperial palace 3 times like passing through the corridors. General Gu Jiantang, who had recently become the leader of the world's machete men, Luo Yang, who was the only one who dared to enter Beimang's imperial city openly, Murong Baoding of Orange State, Deng Mao, who had been defeated by spear fairy Wang Xiu back then, and Han Diaoxi, who was nicknamed Human Cat, ranked 10th. Each dynasty had 5 masters, and it could be said that the world was divided equally between the north and the south. However, it was obvious that Beimang's ranking was relatively lower, which was also the key to the Liang dynasty's approval of the ranking. This kind of unbiased ranking was less exaggerated. Additionally, it was worth mentioning that at the end of the ranking, 2 saints of the 3 religions were specifically pointed out. They were Beimang's state preceptor, Daoist Master Qilin, and Daoist Master Qilin. The other one was the abbot of the 2 Zen temples. Among them, Hong Jingyan, who didn't use a sword, was the pillar of the chess and sword music school. I wonder what Wang Weishua's name is. If I remember correctly, there's remembering the flute on the Phoenix Terrace in the name. Wouldn't he have to report such a long list when he meets people? Moreover, this name is really suitable for both refined and popular tastes. I wonder which unlucky person has the courage to walk out of the chess and sword music school. After Su Fingnian raised his head and laughed, he glanced at Zhao Yang and murmured sadly, "Old Li, you're not on the ranking. Aren't you annoyed by this forgetful Jianghu? When you see the stubborn Jiang and I, let's see how you're going to trick her into learning swordsmanship from you. As for the bull-riding guy, you bastard, why don't you stay a little longer? Martial arts is the best in the world. Didn't you always say that no matter how good you are at the top of Wudong Mountain? The only time you weren't a coward was when you tricked my sister, and I didn't even settle the score with you. In any case, let me, your brother-in-law, roam the Jianghu and brag to others, right?" When the young Wang Dashi reached out to wipe his sweat, he inadvertently saw young Master Su's side profile. He struggled to stand on his tiptoes and sneaked a glance at the girl's back, feeling melancholy in his heart. The reason for his melancholy was simple: he wasn't even as tall as her. Chapter 402. His Royal Highness might not be an expert in the art of war, but he was definitely not a layman. Looking at Yanhuiguan Pass, which had been abandoned on the chessboard of the war between the 2 dynasties, he felt incredible. Not only did it not have the desolation of a declining city wall, but it was even more majestic than the mark on an old map in the prince's mansion. He roughly calculated from a distance. It was obvious that the square city had been rebuilt. The city had expanded from 6 to 9 miles. The city walls were made of rammed earth and bricks. There were battlements outside the city, and there were countless horse-stopping walls covered with bricks. Even the commanding platform had been erected. It looked like a miniature fishing platform. Su Fingnian, who did not intend to enter the city, immediately recommended himself after looking at the city wall of Yanhuiguan Pass from afar. He followed Lu Nerong, Gong Sun Yang, and the 3 young men from the Fish Dragon gang into the city. Since there were no city guards, there was no need for any guide. Su Fengnian walked into the city and subconsciously narrowed his eyes. The first thing he did was not look at the people coming and going, but at the Barbican, which was not built outside the city but inside the city, according to the old military book. The Barbican would be built outside the city. Moreover, the inner Barbican of Yanhuiguan Pass had holes dug in the city wall for soldiers to hide. Su Fengnian had heard Li Yishan and Su Xiao talk about military affairs at the strategic level. They occasionally mentioned the improvement of the Barbican, so there was the idea of setting up the Barbican to hide soldiers. However, the inner Barbican was mostly used as a defensive posture for big cities. Yanhuiguan Pass, which was sandwiched between the 2 dynasties, could withstand the ravages of thousands of iron cavalry even if it had to defend desperately. Without anyone to rely on in the barren desert, isolated and without help, Yanhuiguan was a piece of chicken rib that could not be tasted good no matter how much seasoning was added. To actually spend so much money and effort, what was the intention of the mastermind behind this? Su Fengnian suddenly had an impulse to pull out this nail. Gong Sun Yang, who had been exiled in Beimang when he was a teenager, showed a strong sense of nostalgia. Gong Sun Yang took 2 steps forward, as if he was taking the initiative to collide with 2 children at the same time. The 2 children, who looked 6 or 7 years old but were actually 3 or 4 years older, did not fall. They slid past Gong Sun Yang like swimming fish. Seeing Lu Narong's surprise, Gong Sun Yang chuckled and said, "It's just a few taels of silver. This is called paying respect to a stake in the mountains at the border. It's a common thing. If you don't pay, these children have a lot of local gangsters behind them, which is tantamount to slapping them in the face. You can't avoid being blackmailed by a large group of people. But you can't pay too much. Few fools carry too much money when they go out. Once you become a fat sheep to be slaughtered, it will be more troublesome." Following the direction of Gong Sun Yang's hidden gaze, Lu Narong really saw a middle-aged man with a ruffian aura at the corner of the street. He took the money bag from a child and weighed it in his hand. When he met Lu Narong's eyes, the face of the man with the hideous tattoos on his arm didn't change at all. Instead, he impatiently gestured for her to get lost. Lu Narong did not know whether to laugh or cry. She whispered to Gong Sun Yang, "In Yanhuiguan Pass, are all thieves so bold?" Gong Sun Yang, who was limping, smiled and said, "Here, officials and soldiers are all rats crossing the street. Thieves and bandits are the bosses." Gong Sun Yang hesitated and said, "Miss, we can't stay here for long. Last time at Tuma Pass, the old man thought he was going to die. He did not want the horn bow that had accompanied him for most of his life to be drawn, so he broke the bowstring himself. The bowstring is specially made, and the material can only be found at the border. The shop is not easy to find." Lu Narong nodded and said, "It's not a problem. Uncle Gongsun can go find the string. Let's arrange to meet at the city gate in 2 hours. Is that okay?" Gong Sun Yang thought for a moment and said, "Miss, remember not to enter the shops with little business. Most of these shops have big backers to be able to take root in Yanhuiguan Pass. They make a lot of money and are not easy to deal with. Also, buying things in a place like Yanhuiguan was naturally a lot more expensive than buying things in other places. This money should not be distressed. The more you haggled, the more those shrewd merchants would sell things at a higher price. They would not feel any pain even if they shouted the price to the heavens. Also, in Yanhuiguan Pass, although you have to endure when you encounter big things, you must not lower your head and show your cowardice. At the border, where people rely on their fists to make a living, it is easy to attract flies that bully the weak and fear the strong. These people have noses better than dogs and eyes sharper than eagles." Lu Narong remembered all of this in her heart. Before Gong Sun Yang left, he added, "If you don't see me in 2 hours, don't wait." Lu Narong was just about to speak, but Gong Sun Yang waved his hand and left without saying a word. After hearing the warning, the young men of the Fish Dragon gang, who were not afraid of tigers, immediately shrank back, which made Lu Nerong angry. Only Su Fengnian stood beside her calmly. He had the potential to attract flies, which had attracted the interest of the woman with the mink forehead, and also the ability to frighten some snakes and rats. After all, a young master who dared to enter Yanhuiguan Pass was not a weak scholar. He would only come to the border to study if he had nothing better to do. Previously, there was a great literary master who was famous for his frontier poems and only took his page to visit the border. In less than half a month, someone took his broken finger to ask for a huge ransom from his family. Fortunately, his family was rich and he handed over the money. The border kidnappers were quite trustworthy. Moreover, the literary master had a relationship with the border army, so he went back alive. As for the page boy, it was said that he was dismembered by the impatient kidnappers who waited for the ransom. At the real border, the folk customs were extremely simple and plain. As Lu Nerong, Su Fengnian, and the others walked, a woman wearing skimpy clothes walked towards them. Her clothes were thin, and her breasts were swaying. The woman was petite, and she was half a head shorter than Lu Nerong. However, when a burly man bumped into her chest, she quickly kicked him in the groin. She lifted her leg and retracted it in one breath. She didn't even look at the man who was 3 times her weight but was rolling on the ground. She probably despised him for being noisy, so she turned around and kicked the hairy man in the chest. Her embroidered shoe directly stepped into the pitiful man's chest. The woman's expression didn't change as she lifted her foot up, and blood dripped down endlessly. Some cheered loudly, some ridiculed, but there was no one who spoke up for justice when they saw a murder case. When the woman saw Su Fengnian, she smiled charmingly. When the two brushed past each other, she slapped Su Fengnian's butt loudly. The 3 people from the fish dragons behind Su Fengnian were stunned. Lu Nerong turned her head and looked at the woman who didn't forget to look back at Su Fengnian. Then she looked at the man surnamed Su who was walking straight ahead. As if sensing Lu Nerong's resentment, Su Fengnian said helplessly, "What? Do you want me to shout molestation? When the time comes, you'll be the only heroine on the whole street. It'll be fun." Lu Nerong turned her head and the corners of her mouth curled up. Chapter 403. The 3 members of the Fish Dragon gang couldn't understand why Su always took all the good things for himself. When they were at Falling Horse Pass, the plump beauty with the mink fur coat almost wanted to snatch this pretty boy. When they entered the city, they got a snake wall for no reason. Now, they had only been in the city for a short while, and he was being teased by a woman whose breasts could suffocate a man to death. Comparisons were odious. The 3 of them rolled their eyes and glared daggers at Su. After a while, they were no longer frightened by the notoriety of Yanhui Pass. Lu Nerong, who was afraid that the 3 of them would be exposed, felt relieved. Following Gong Sun Yang's instructions, she went to a few popular shops and bought some dry food and water. The price of water here was as expensive as oil. If it wasn't for Gong Sun Yang's reminder, Lu Nerong really wanted to turn around and leave when she saw the shopkeeper squatting by the well with a ladle. When she heard the man's obscene words, saying that he would give her a ladle of water if she just touched his hand, she almost pulled out her sword and stabbed him. She could only stay a few steps away and let Su deal with these hooligans. Lu Nerong stroked her rapidly heaving chest and subconsciously looked down. She didn't feel it before, but compared to the shameless woman just now, it seemed that her breasts were really not big. While she was in a trance, someone patted her shoulder. Lu Nerong, who seemed to have seen through her shameful thoughts, blushed, but pretended to be ferocious and looked very awkward. She saw Su standing in front of her with a gourd ladle filled with well water. Lu Nerong frowned. Su smiled and said, "Don't worry, this is my treat. I lied to the man who sold the well water that you are my sister. I promise to introduce you to him later." This ladle of water was originally sold to strangers for 3 taels of silver, but now it's only half a string of money. Anyway, I'm borrowing your favor, so there's no need to feel guilty about drinking it, right? Lu Narong hesitated for a moment and squeezed out a smile. Forget it, I'll just put it in the water bag. Su Fengnian looked at the young woman whose lips were so dry that they were bleeding. He was angry and amused at the same time. I said it was for you to drink. I took advantage of your favor because I was a rascal. Why are you learning from me? Do you want to drink it? If you don't want to drink, I'll drink it myself. Lu Narong took the gourd ladle and raised it in the air. Her lips didn't touch the ladle as she slowly poured the cool water from the well into her mouth. She felt a refreshing coolness from head to toe. She stopped to drink it slowly several times until there was still half of it left. The man surnamed Su saw that she was in a difficult position and took the ladle without saying anything else. He raised his head and gulped it down. He patted his belly and turned around to return the gourd ladle in satisfaction. He didn't forget to whisper a few words to the shifty-eyed well-keeper. Lu Narong clearly knew that the two of them were destined to have nothing good to say, but she couldn't get angry. She secretly scolded herself, Lu Narong, where is your backbone? Is it only worth half a ladle of water? The 3 young men from the fish dragons were carrying more than 20 water bags, a large bag of dry food, and cooked food such as sauced beef. Su Fengnian was empty-handed, except for the spring thunder hanging on his waist. It was inevitable that he would be glared at again. He walked beside Lu Narong and said with a smile, you don't know how expensive oil and salt are until you're in charge of the family. Just buying water cost you more than 80 taels of silver. How do you feel? Lu Narong used her finger to moisten the corners of her dry lips and didn't say anything. When they approached the city gate, there was still some time left before the 2 hours agreed with Gong Sun Yang. Su Fengnian suddenly stopped and said, I may have to stay in Yanhui Pass for a day or 2, but I definitely won't delay the business in Yanhui City. I won't see Miss Lu out of the city. Lu Narong looked sideways at Su Fengnian and calmly asked, if anything happens, who can I find to reason with? How can I go back and see my grandfather? And the 4 coffins that are still on the way to Lingzhou? Will I be qualified to go to the morning hall to burn incense? Su Fengnian frowned slightly and was thinking about what to say. Lu Narong let out a long breath and said softly, I've vented my anger. Young Master Su is magnanimous, so don't lower yourself to my level. You just have to be careful. Su Fengnian wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, he just waved his hand and turned to walk back into the city. He came to a tea stall on the outskirts of the Barbican and sat down. The water was simple well water, and the tea leaves were also the dregs of cheap tea leaves. It was not an exaggeration for a familiar face in Yanhui Pass to pay for water, especially for the residents who had taken root. Drinking well water did not cost much, but a bowl of tea would cost half a dozen coins. In the end, it did not matter if the tea was good or bad. To be able to travel thousands of li from Jiangnan or Shishu to Yanhui Pass on the tea horse ancient road, even if it was tea dregs that could not be placed in a banquet in the south of the Liang dynasty, it was not cheap. Su Fengnian originally had around 300 taels of silver on him. Later, he took advantage of the burning house and plundered around 200 taels of silver in banknotes. He could still afford to drink a few bowls of tea. He quietly waited for the boiling tea to warm up and took a sip. Looking at the barbican that did not fit into the military system of the 2 dynasties, Su Fengnian's brows were gloomy. Along the way, he even squatted in a corner for half a day. He noticed that the drainage troughs made of bricks on the inner walls were meticulously built. They were built like this, and they were maintained like this. Slowly retracting his gaze, Su Fengnian prepared to walk around the city 2 more times later. Besides, after arriving at this quiet Yanhuiguan Pass where the frost-heavy drum was, if he continued to head north, he would truly arrive at Beimang. The owner of the tavern was a middle-aged man. Looking at Su Fengnian's appearance, he did not seem to be lacking in money, so he shamelessly mentioned how authentic his braised beef was. Su Fengnian agreed with a smile. As the sun set in the west, wild geese from the south flew overhead. A plate of steaming roast meat was placed on the table. Su Fengnian picked up a piece with his chopsticks. Unsurprisingly, it was wild beef from the local area. Of course, it was not as delicious as yellow beef. However, the tavern owner, who was selling tea and cooking ladles, was somewhat quick-witted. He took a type of vegetable that was known as everlasting spring and marinated it in the roast meat. It was better than any other spices. This large plate of roast beef looked extraordinary, and its taste was also mouth-watering. Su Fengnian simply asked the tavern owner to replace the tea with wine, and then asked him to go to the stall next door that sold pancakes to buy 2 large pieces. This meal was very comfortable. Su Fengnian raised his head and saw a travel-worn old scholar. He was short and carried a large bamboo bookcase that was seriously disproportionate to his body size. His figure could be considered vigorous. When he smelled the aroma of the wine, pancakes, and beef, his appetite was aroused. He sat down heavily, took off the bookcase, and casually placed it at his feet. He rubbed his shoulders and waved to the tavern owner, saying, "Please give me the same meal as this young master." The tavern owner's ability to judge people was already practiced to the point of perfection. Although he was unhappy, he did not move his feet, which could be considered as saving the old scholar's face by not directly asking if he had brought enough money. The old scholar did not mind. He took out a cotton money pouch, dipped his finger in his saliva, and took out some silver and copper coins. He divided them into 2 piles and pushed one pile toward the tavern owner. The latter made mistakes when judging people, but when it came to money, his eyes were sharp and golden. He wiped the money on the table and put the silver and copper coins into his sleeves. His face was full of smiles, and he hurriedly took out some wine and shouted for the stall next door to bring 2 pancakes over, saying that he owed the tavern owner money first. Then, he busied himself with the braised beef. Not long after, he brought the same dish of everlasting spring beef to the old scholar. The white-haired old scholar patted the dust on his sleeves, raising a lot of dust. He held the pancake in one hand and the chopsticks in the other. The bowl of wine was placed in front of him so that he could drink it if he lowered his head. He ate the pancake with the wine and meat. He was already very busy, but the old scholar was still unwilling to stop. He said that the beef nourished qi and blood and was beneficial to the qi disc. He also said that the everlasting spring beef could clear the eyes and remove annoyances, detoxify, and clear away heat. He chattered non-stop, but the pedantic old scholar ate very slowly. The customers at the nearby tables were already envious of the old man eating heartily. They could not stand his chatter, so they threw their money and left. This made the tavern owner, who could not wait for the customers to leave, very happy. No matter how much Su Fengnian chewed and swallowed, he still put down his chopsticks after he finished eating. He asked the owner of the tea house, "Is there a shop in the city that makes bows? It's best if it's an old shop." Yan Huiguan was only so big, and the owner of the tea house had lived here for 5 or 6 years. He could walk down with his eyes closed. He rewarded himself with half a bowl of wine and replied with a smile, "There is, why not? It's just 2 streets away. The old man's surname is Zhang, and the bao is long. He casually takes out a bao embryo from his shop and can make people jealous. It has been passed down from generation to generation, and the craftsmanship has been passed down for more than 10 generations. I heard that he used to be the royal craftsman of Dongyue and Shishu. Old Zhang came to our Yan Huiguan early. His daughter-in-law is a local, and his grandson was born here. Can young master draw a bao? But I'll say the ugly words first. Old Zhang has a strange temper. There's a 2-stone bao hanging in front of the shop. If you can't draw it properly, you won't be allowed to enter. If young master's arm strength is average, don't go and ask for humiliation. Su Fengnian said, "Oh, a two-stone bow. I can't draw it properly." Su Fengnian regretfully asked, "Is there a shop where I can buy a bow embryo without drawing it? I can't afford a bow that's too good." Seeing that the old man was still talking endlessly, Su Fengnian couldn't help but laugh and say, "Old mister, bend over and see if your bag of books has fallen." The old scholar didn't respond to this teasing and was still immersed in his own world. Su Fengnian paid the exact same amount of money and got up to leave. Just now, when he saw that the scholar had split the money in half, Su Fengnian had been calculating what price the owner would call out while eating. After calculating, a pot of coarse and strong swallowtail wine, a plate of everlasting spring braised pork, and even the premium price of the bowl of tea dregs after walking on the tea-horse ancient road were all included. In addition to Yan Huiguan's efforts to rip off unfamiliar faces, he found that the old man was not only a chatterbox who liked to drop his bag of books, but also an old scholar who was good at calculating. Chapter 404. The tea-house owner was chewing on a piece of broken silver. When he saw the teeth marks on the silver, a smile bloomed on his face. In the past, when he sold tea, the profit was as thin as paper. Most of the time, he sold to neighbors who knew him well, so he couldn't bear to be ruthless. Today, he had earned a lot of silver from 2 plates of meat and 2 pots of wine. When he went back home in the evening, he would claim credit for it with his wife. Perhaps his wife, who looked coarse but had a huge butt, would do some work. He would ask her to sit on top of him obediently and grind the 2 plump pieces of meat on the millstone. Usually, when he had sex, this woman would just lie there with her arms and legs spread out. He finally felt some pleasure, but suddenly heard her thunder-like snoring, which was extremely depressing. It was said that blessings never come in pairs. Today, God opened his eyes. A young master with a saber with a mixed accent had just left, and before the old Confucian scholar had left, a large group of men and women with noble auras had arrived. There were 7 or 8 of them. One of them, a woman with a sword, was so beautiful that the tea-house owner's eyes almost popped out. The tea-house owner could be considered a remnant of the southern Tang dynasty. His whole family had fled to this stepmother's Yan Huiguan. His father had long passed away with hatred, so he had long forgotten about the family sacrifice. Most of the time, when he burned incense, he absent-mindedly said a few trivial words to bless his business and was too lazy to mention anything about the spring and autumn period or southern Tang dynasty. It had been many years since he had thought about the lotus pond under the humid climate in the south. When the sky was clear after the rain, there was a green lotus standing tall and graceful. The woman in front of him really made people feel ashamed of their inferiority, so he couldn't even have any evil thoughts about her. In Yan Huiguan, there were all kinds of people coming and going. It was the first time for him to see such a stunning beauty. The tea-house owner, who was in a good mood, shouted enthusiastically. When he heard that an elegant middle-aged swordsman in yellow only asked for 8 bowls of tea, he didn't mind. She was a feast for the eyes. If he could get a closer look at the woman, who was about 24 or 25 years old, he didn't mind at all. Traveling beyond the Great Wall, no matter how good the foundation of a beauty was, her charm would be reduced by half by the yellow sand and the scorching sun. How could she be as moist as the one in front of him, who could make him feel refreshed just by looking at her? His master, Wu Miaozai, was the yellow-clothed swordsman who had asked to buy the tea. Wang Weishua had a wide range of friends in the sect and was already familiar with the people in the room. This was especially true for martial uncle Huang, who was as beautiful as a green lotus. Back then, the latter was annoyed by Wang Weishua's pestering and made Wang Weishua bedridden for half a year with just 3 strikes of his sword. This incident had caused a huge commotion. The martial uncle Huang was a direct disciple of the chess manor, while the woman with the surname Huang, who came from a poor family, was a popular candidate to be the next mansion master of the sword manor. Originally, the sword manor intended to ground her for half a year so that everyone would have a way out. However, the martial uncle Wang Yong personally wrote a letter of apology to the woman. After that, Wang Weishue jumped out of bed and didn't hold a grudge. Instead, his relationship with martial uncle Huang had improved slightly. Wang Weishue, who was known for his extravagance, didn't speak to his master. Instead, he looked at a muscular woman with dark skin and said with a smile, "Martial uncle Yizhu, my master is stingy and stingy. Why don't we order a portion of braised beef and make them drool?" The woman had a coarse appearance to begin with. Next to the woman in a green dress and embroidered shoes, who had her hair tied up with a red sandalwood hairpin, she looked even uglier. Furthermore, the name Yi Zhu sounded like sarcasm. Fortunately, the dark-skinned woman's breadth of mind wasn't inferior to men. She waved her hand and said, "As long as it's your treat, martial uncle won't say anything." Wu Miaozai laughed heartily and said, "Don't worry about scarcity, but worry about uneven distribution. You're a disciple who favors outsiders. We won't make you poor. Other than your martial uncle Huang, treat each of us to a plate of braised beef." "Boss, is there enough beef?" The tea house owner didn't give these fat sheep a chance to go back on their word. He ran to the back to chop the beef and shouted as he ran, "There's enough." Wang Weishue glanced at the old scholar sitting in the corner. He retracted his gaze and said softly, "I spent money to buy information at Yanmen Pass. The Bailiang people who came from Tumbling Horse Pass are all from the Fish Dragon gang in Lingzhou. They're a small gang with at most 200 to 300 people. The gang leader's surname is Liu. The one who led the way this time, Lu Narong, is the granddaughter of the gang leader. There's nothing suspicious about this group of people. They definitely don't know old Gu Tu. However, there's a young man with a saber in the Fish Dragon gang. He's a little strange." According to the senior brothers, after they came back, they saw a genuine Legend of Gong Yang on the ground. At that time, what I saw was old Gu Tu escaping with the Qingfu sword cannon on the cover of the Legend of Gong Yang. The man with the saber chased after him and said that he wanted to acknowledge a master. After that, he said that he didn't know what happened. "I deliberately threw a piece of snake wall to this guy. I hope that more people will talk and make this guy reveal himself." The yellow-clothed Wu Miaozai had an elegant appearance. He was a man with a beautiful beard. When a man reached 40 years old, as long as he had a temperament, he would be a real flower. Mature women were more picky than little girls. This was the only thing that they liked. He twirled his beard with 2 fingers and said with a smile, "A shrimp crossing the river can't even take care of himself. We don't need to be distracted. This Qingfu sword cannon from the Wu family's sword tomb is extremely precious. However, what makes our chess and sword music school even more curious is that other than this top-notch sword riding classic, there are 3 or 4 other secret manuals that entered the border at almost the same time. If the mastermind wants to do this, it will be interesting. Westlake Shitty, what do you think?" The man who was as thin as a monkey but dressed in luxurious brocade clothes looked completely different from Wu Miaozai. He held an iron rui in his hand, but his eyes were clear and cold. He had a kind of dignity that could only be felt without being angry. He smiled slowly and said, "East deity Shixiang, you are blind. With my one-track mind, I can only find that guy surnamed Song and kill him with the iron rui." Chapter 405. The rest of the disciples smiled knowingly. It was true that Shihu's disciple was straightforward, but playing chess was like being a human being. Every time he placed a chess piece, he would strike at the heart of others. He definitely could not be underestimated. The 3 mansions of the chess and sword music school were able to be harmonious on the outside because of Shihu and Dendrobium, who were both boorish and meticulous at the same time. Furthermore, the most enviable thing about the chess and sword music school was that there were no less than 20 pairs of immortal couples in the school. They either lived in seclusion in the manor and practiced their swordsmanship all year round, or they walked the pugilistic world hand in hand. They helped each other in times of need, but they did not forget each other in the pugilistic world. To the chess and sword music school, a Qingfu sword code was not a big deal. It was also not something that they would beat their chest and stamp their feet if they could not find it. Otherwise, they would not have only sent Wu Miaozai's generation of elites out of the manor. Instead, they deliberately let Wang Weishua and the rest of the juniors come to the border to gain experience. To read thousands of books and travel thousands of miles, in addition to the chess and sword music school's unique million chess pieces, was the school's purpose. Wu Miaozai alone might not be able to subdue old Gu of the devil path, but together with the other two disciples, it was enough to trap him to death. Therefore, if an elder of a higher generation in the manor came out, such as Wu Miaozai's master, Yi Shanlu, whose name was Fisherman's father, his swordsmanship was as decisive as the wind of chess. As long as he was seen, the demon surnamed Song, who was lucky enough to obtain the Qingfu sword code, would not be able to escape. Wang Weishua had been secretly sizing up the sword manor's martial uncle Huang, who was drinking tea. Wang Weishua was born in the first class of the dynasty, so he had seen all kinds of beauties. There was no doubt that this elder's beauty was beautiful, but what really moved him was her rough circumstances. She was born in an inconspicuous family in the Dragon's Waste province. When she was young, she was chosen by her master, who had traveled far and wide, and brought back to the chess and sword music school, causing a sensation in the three manors. Everyone praised her for her extraordinary talent, which was not inferior to any of the previous manor masters. The second class, banished Immortal, title had been vacant for 100 years. The sword manor master originally wanted to give it to the delicate little doll, but he was worried that he would spoil things if he did not do so, so he wanted to wait for the girl to grow up to take the title of banished Immortal herself. This child did not disappoint him. After practicing swordsmanship for 3 years, she reached the profound level of swordsmanship. Unexpectedly, she fell seriously ill at the age of 10 and almost died suddenly. After that, her meridians withered and her acupuncture points closed. For the next 5 years, she did not speak a word and was no different from a mute. She practiced swordsmanship all day long, but to no avail. At the age of 16, she was judged to be a famous poet, but only received the 6th grade. Mountain gradually turns green. To make matters worse, her master passed away soon after. If that were the case, this girl named Huang Baozhuang would have remained a nobody for the rest of her life after her epiphany. However, at the age of 18, she entered the Green Mountain behind the sect by herself. By the time she left the Green Mountain, she had already enlightened 212 acupores. She then practiced the sword, and her realm improved by leaps and bounds. The 3 prefectures were shaken, and she was regarded as a genius who had the potential to become the next sword chi master. Even Hong Jingyan, who was already the #1 player in the chess and sword music school, often played chess with her. Wang Weishua said infatuatedly, "What a good mountain gradually turns green." Wu Miaozai kicked this lecherous disciple of his under the table, and the latter immediately returned to his normal state and smiled mischievously. After Hong Jingyan, Huang Baozhuang, who had once again received the full support of the chess and sword music school, finished her tea. She stood up and gently bowed to her senior brothers and sisters before silently leaving. Everyone was used to it, and after returning the greeting, they continued chatting. Only Wang Weishua wanted to follow, but was pulled back to his seat by his master, Wu Miaozai. His Royal Highness stood on the city wall and overlooked the entire city. At this time, Yanhui Pass was quiet and serene, like an old woman dozing off in her twilight years. However, His Royal Highness was sure that this old woman had nothing to do with kindness. Once she began to struggle, she would be abnormally ferocious. Su Fingnian was the only one on the city wall. He slowly walked to the platform on the east wall, where there was a stone tablet. After squatting down to take a closer look, he saw that it was the masterpiece of Beimang's calligraphy master, Yu Liang, called Records of the Buddhist Shrine. The writing was obscure and mixed with too many Buddhist terms, so most people would not be able to recognize it. However, Yu Liang's writing was exceedingly refined, and his writing was top-notch. Among the 4 great calligraphy masters in the world, Beimang's Yu Liang, who was the armorer advisor, was on the list. Even the literary circle of the Liang dynasty sincerely praised that Yu Longzhua's writing is filled with the spirit of gold and stone. The Beimang Empress was also quite fond of this official of calligraphy. She once joked to a close official, "Yu Liang is learned and skilled. He seeks favor with his calligraphy and expresses his gratitude with his writing. He is like a little bird that relies on its owner and is wholeheartedly close to me. I will naturally take pity on Yu Liang." Su Fengnian sat cross-legged and read Records of the Buddhist Shrine, word by word. After reading it, he laughed involuntarily and said, Master Yu, it must be uncomfortable to be described as a little bird that relies on its owner by a 50-year-old woman, right?" Then, Su Fengnian turned his head and asked with a smile, "Miss, do you like to hear me read Records of the Buddhist Shrine?" Behind His Royal Highness was Shan Jiaqing, Huang Baozhuang, who had inadvertently arrived at the city wall. An ancient sword, green waist, hung from her waist. It was one of the 3 famous swords that had been collected by the sword residents for 400 years. It was rumored that the sword's pattern was like 9 green snakes that swam in the water like living creatures. In the chess and sword music school, Huang Baozhuang, whose face was as cold as frost, revealed a trace of shyness. Su Fengnian was inevitably surprised. It was harder than ascending to the heavens to find a thin-skinned woman in Yanhui Pass. Moreover, she was also very beautiful. He glanced at the green silk-wrapped scabbard and asked, "Miss, are you from the chess and sword music school?" She hesitated for a moment and then nodded. Su Fengnian stood up and bowed. "I am Su Dianxia, the Dianxia of the palace and the Xia of the sword case." Huang Baozhuang returned the greeting with the unique sword salute of the chess and sword music school. In the blink of an eye, Su Fengnian's figure suddenly rose and rushed to the woman's side. He placed one hand on her chest to seal her qi and the other hand pinched her chin, forcing her to open her mouth. He squinted his eyes and looked into her mouth. "Just as I expected, Master once taught me some lost physiognomy. I only remembered the 6 most magical physiognomy, including the celestial physiognomy and the dragon concubine physiognomy. This miss actually has 2 of them. She should have died a long time ago because she couldn't bear it. There must be the only pearl in the vast history that has been witnessed and recorded growing in her body." There was a red pearl hanging in Huang Baozhuang's mouth. After she opened her mouth, it was difficult to conceal the brilliance and color of the 1,000-year-old pearl. Huang Baozhuang's tears rolled down her cheeks like beads. Her eyes gradually lost focus, but she still tried her best to hoarsely say, "Run." Chapter 406. Su Fengnian was not stupid. He knew that the girl from the chess and sword music school had a split personality. He obviously preferred to deal with the shy and graceful girl. The girl in front of him should be at least in the finger Xian realm. Spitting out the pearl was equivalent to releasing a great demon. No wonder she told him to run away. It wasn't that Su Fengnian was greedy for this pearl that was rumored to be able to make a woman stay young forever. At the very least, he wanted to see the wonders of the celestial form and the dragon concubine form. However, he never expected that a pearl would cause so much trouble. Killing people across realms was very satisfying, but it was proven that Su Fengnian could not do it at the moment. She said playfully, "Promising not to kill doesn't mean you can live happily. But you do have some skills. You can withstand a flick of the finger. You should have drawn your sword and killed him from the beginning. You wouldn't be in such a sorry state. Why did you hesitate? It's stupid to have tender feelings for the fairer sex. You've practiced your sword to the point of being deliberate. This is the same as Li Chungang who sealed his sword after reaching the Finger Xian realm. Yes, you have the embryonic form of Li Chuangong's sword Qi rolling dragon wall in the Western Shu Imperial Palace. What's your relationship with this old man? Tell me. If I'm happy, I'll teach you some good things that are not inferior to the two-sleeved green snake. Su Fengnian held the spring thunder superfluously. The girl stood on the city wall with her hands behind her back. Her red and purple eyes were very scary. She smiled condescendingly and said, "Oh, it seems that this old man really has a place in your heart. You're even willing to risk your life to protect him. What's so great about him? He just entered the Vajra realm at the age of 16 and the Finger Xian realm at the age of 19. That's about the same as me. Besides, he only reached the celestial phenomenon realm at the age of 24, which is later than me. What a joke. I think it's only your Liang dynasty that doesn't have a true master. Oh, Wang Xianji is one." Su Fengnian, who had been silent all this time, finally opened his mouth. He spat out the blood that had already surged to his throat. It was not that he wanted to be a mute, but he really could not speak. He could only make a few words with his mouth. She stretched out a finger, and the pearl twirled around it. She smiled and said, "Oh, you mean go and *ck your mother." After she finished speaking, Su Fengnian's sleeves fluttered. After he closed his mouth again, the blood flowing from the corner of his mouth became even thicker. She curled her lips and sneered, "It's only because you don't know who I am that you have so much backbone." She jumped down from the city wall and stretched. She held the pearl and gently rubbed it against her cheek. She sighed reluctantly and said, "Let's go back." Li Zhu went back into her mouth, and the light in her eyes gradually dimmed. The woman with the green sword stood there in a daze. When she finally saw Su Fengnian sitting on the ground, she ran to His Royal Highness with teary eyes. She pressed her lips together and gestured in the air with her fingers. Su Fengnian, who didn't dare to slack off, understood what she was trying to say. "Don't kill me. I'm sorry. If I open my mouth or die, she will come out and kill a lot of people." Su Fengnian was secretly glad that he didn't kill her when she came back to her senses. Her words to provoke him were indeed premeditated. He was afraid that she deliberately gave him a chance to kill the other her. This terrifying demoness was quite scheming. This relatively ordinary female swordsman from the chess and sword music school was just as close to the Vajra realm as he was. When it came to close combat, Su Fengnian was 90% sure that he could kill her. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to subdue her in an instant. She was clearly a fledgling who had no experience in the martial world and fighting. Most of the direct disciples of the top sects were like this. They advanced step by step on the path of martial arts. They seemed to be far ahead, but once they met a martial artist of the same realm who had climbed through the ranks in the martial world, only death would await them. Moreover, with her rare situation, the chess and sword music school was magnanimous enough not to chain her up like a ferocious beast. Su Fengnian smiled bitterly as he vomited blood. It was as sad as it could be. It made Huang Baozhuang, who grew up in the chess and sword music school and didn't have much experience in the world, feel so guilty that she completely forgot that this man with a saber was asking for it. There were two distinct extremes. One of them had caused a terrible disaster in her last appearance, while the other of them only knew how to immerse themselves in sword practice and keep a straight face in the chess and sword music school, which was the stupidest way to deal with everyone. She would do whatever her master said. After her master passed away, she was at a loss like a blind person, only daring to hide and cry secretly. At this moment, she had forgotten to be reserved and shy. She reached out her trembling hands to help this strange man wipe away the blood, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't wipe it clean. Su Fengnian gently raised his hand to stop her. She was more of a hindrance than a help and said helplessly, "It's okay. You'll get used to vomiting. You won't die." Su Fengnian curiously asked, "Who is she?" Huang Baozhuang sobbed and fell silent. Su Fengnian didn't ask further. In the Liang dynasty, the diabolism was very weak, especially when the 6 great devils were killed by Qi Xuanzhen alone. After Su Shao became famous in Jianghu, some gangs with names that were slightly suspicious of the diabolism hurriedly changed their names and started to behave themselves. However, the Beimang dynasty was very different. Except for supporting a few big sects to monopolize Jianghu, the Beimang royal court had always ignored the so-called diabolism sections. Therefore, those big evil sects that openly ate people's hearts and livers and used yin to nourish yang could still thrive. The Beimang royal court had always adhered to the principle that people in Jianghu should solve Jianghu matters with their own hands. This time, in the Beimang martial arts ranking, in addition to the top 10 in the world, there were also 10 diabolism giants. Any one of them would be famous in Jianghu 10 times in the Liang dynasty. Among them, Luo Yang, who ranked first, fought in the Eastern Brocade, Tangerine, and Dragon Waste prefectures with only her hands. Finally, she openly killed her way to the imperial city and killed everyone she saw. That was not enough. Only when the god of war, Tuoba, arrived at the imperial city did he stop the footsteps of this purple-robed devil. The northern Mang Empress was watching the battle from the top of the city walls. She had been patient from beginning to end and didn't mobilize the 6,000 armored soldiers guarding the imperial city. Instead, she said, using 6,000 armored soldiers to kill Luoyang, wouldn't my majestic northern Mang lose 12,000 good men? Such a Jianghu, such a Beimang, should be seen with her own eyes. Fengnian, have you ever thought about whether the 300,000 cavalrymen of Beiliang will be able to defend against a direct attack from the Empire of Beimang if they have to worry about being stabbed in the back? That night, Su Shao asked this question as they were nearing the end of their secret conversation. Su Fengnian moved back and leaned against the wall to stop the bleeding. He raised his arm and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. He smiled bitterly and said, "I was impulsive at that time and was disrespectful to you. Please forgive me." Huang Baozhuang shook her head and pointed at Su Fengnian's face. She continued to gesture and said, "Your mask is broken." Previously, when he was squatting at the foot of the wall at Yanhui Pass, he had put on a mask that Xu Xiu had meticulously made. After the battle with her, Su Fengnian carefully tore it off bit by bit. With Huang Baozhuang's help, his original face was gradually revealed, and it was slightly pale. Su Fengnian stretched out a hand. Huang Baozhuang thought that he wanted her to support him, so she also stretched out her hand and was pulled into his embrace. Huang Baozhuang was at a loss and her delicate body stiffened. Su Fengnian laughed softly and said, "I know what you want to say. You don't like me." "I didn't say that I liked you. I just vomited so much blood. In any case, I have to earn back my capital. I don't do business where I lose money." The exhausted His Royal Highness closed his eyes. He remembered Su Shao saying that when he was young, he was beaten half to death when he met his wife for the first time. Chapter 407. At a young age, Huang Baozhuang had been brought by her master to the immortal abode in Beimang's heart. Her slender shoulders had been burdened with too many burdens early on. Later on, apart from practicing her sword and playing chess, she had nothing else to do. The chess and sword music school placed too much importance on her and did not allow anyone to privately write down their thoughts on this piece of fine writing paper. As she grew from a young child to a young lady, she had almost only interacted with her master and the 2 manor heads. Countless times, she had stood on her tiptoes on the towering pavilions, overlooking the distant sounds of laughter that had nothing to do with her. She was filled with curiosity and longing. After Huang Baozhuang turned 10, she began to realize that there was another version of herself. At the age of 16, she was born on Mount Qingshan. This version of her was so strong that the chess and sword music school had no choice but to have a grandmaster keep an eye on her at all times. She slid to wherever she could as if she were stepping on a watermelon rind. After she turned 20, her master was no longer alive. Other than the Grand Master Bronze Man, only senior martial brother Hong would come to play chess with her from time to time. Both of them were terrible chess players. After the manor head of the chess manor saw their games, he was no longer willing to watch the game from the sidelines. Huang Baozhuang knew that apart from her existence and her sword practice, she had no other good points. She was terrible at chess and was illiterate. She had always envied her senior martial brothers and sisters in the sect for having the ability to read and write poems. Before they entered Yanmen Pass, senior martial brother Wu Miaozai of the East Deity sect had made a bet with senior martial brother Shihu of the West Deity sect to see who would be able to read records of the Buddhist shrine, word for word. As a result, when she ascended the city wall and saw his back, she heard him recite it so easily. Her master, the two manor heads, the Grand Master Bronze Man, and senior martial brother Hong. Including her, there were a total of 6 people. However, if His Royal Highness knew that he was only ranked third from the bottom in terms of number of people, he would definitely feel that this kind of erudition was too insincere. Seeing that there was no one around, Su Fengnian took out a stack of thin masks from his bosom. He carefully peeled off one of the masks and pasted it on his face. Huang Baozhuang didn't hide her astonishment at all. Even though it looked like he was just slapping a mask on his face, it was actually a meticulous work that wasn't inferior to embroidery. Su Fengnian's essence, qi, and spirit were severely damaged. He was afraid that he would reveal any flaws. Just as he was about to tell her to check if there was anything wrong, she had already reached out her hand and slowly and gently smoothed out some of the tiny imperfections on his face. There were a total of 6 masks. His Royal Highness didn't know the specifics because Xu Xiu had been burning the midnight oil for more than 20 years. His Royal Highness didn't know the specifics either. In any case, during that period of time, Aunt Xu, whose breasts were like spring bamboo shoots, would caress his face whenever she had the time. Every time she caressed his face, it would take a long time for several incense sticks to burn. Only God knew if she had any thoughts of taking advantage of him. There were a few times when His Royal Highness could clearly feel her 2 cherry tips standing straight up on his chest or arm. His heart was in a complete mess. She was indeed a mature woman. When spring arrived, she was like a cat that couldn't stand loneliness. Su Fengnian saw that Huang Baozhuang's eyes were full of interest and amazement when she was helping him. He smiled and explained, this mask was made by a master of disguise who came from the southern Xinjiang witchcraft sect. She said that there were 5 levels to the art of disguise: pawn, ventilation, rooting, enchanting, and reincarnation. Pawn is the crudest form of disguise. It can only fool ordinary people with poor eyesight. Ventilation is considered to have reached a higher level. If one can take root, it won't be easy to see through. Enchanting, not only one's appearance will change, even one's demeanor will change after putting on the mask. As for reincarnation, she said that she had only heard of it. You should know that the face is born from the heart. Putting on this kind of mask is equivalent to changing a part of one's root bone. It may even cause unpredictable changes to one's fate. She helped me make 6 masks, 1 for pawn and 1 for enchanting, and 4 for rooting. The one in your hand is a pawn. The one that was damaged just now was a rooting. You people from the chess and sword music school should be able to understand the deeper meaning of this saying. Su Fengnian stood up. Huang Baozhuang hurriedly stood up and took a few steps back. Su Fengnian knew that they shouldn't stay here for long. Before leaving, he whispered, "You and I will treat it as if nothing happened today. Don't tell anyone about it." Unexpectedly, Huang Baozhuang shook her head. Su Fengnian asked in surprise, "You want to report it to the chess and sword music school?" She nodded her head. Su Fengnian frowned. He was in a dilemma. If the woman in front of him was only a direct disciple of the chess and sword music school, killing her would be the safest thing to do, regardless of whether it was right or not. However, she had a mysterious background. Killing her was equivalent to releasing an invincible devil, if not heaven or earth. It was no different from suicide. However, kidnapping her was really not a wise decision. She was destined to be an important chess piece of the chess, sword and music house. Her importance was probably only second to Hong Jingyan. Taking her away was equivalent to stabbing the chess, sword and music house in the ass. Yet, she was still shouting for them to chase after her. The chess, sword and music house was powerful and lofty. Who else would they chase after if not her? They couldn't kill her or kidnap her to seal her mouth, so how could they just let her go? Chapter 408. Su Fengnian rubbed his forehead and pondered. This woman looks quite amiable. When he was threatened by her heart, the first thing she did was tell him to run for his life. Why is she still so stubborn? She doesn't know how to be tactful at all. Su Fengnian sighed heavily. Well, it seems that he won't be able to clean up his mess. Anyway, at that time, in order to not cause trouble for the fish dragon gang, he had asked the hook-nosed old man for a copy of Legend of the Ram. This would dispel the doubts of Jianghu people outside of the chess and sword music school. It also meant that as long as Wang Weishua was careful, he would be in trouble. After he parted ways with the fish dragon gang in Luqing, he would make a big fuss anyway. You chess and sword music school can do whatever you want. I'll deal with whatever comes my way. Huang Baozhuang hesitated for a moment and gestured with her slender fingers. I'll only say that I saw you and that you wanted me to spit out the pearl. But I won't say your name, your sword, or your mask. Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment. With a bright smile on his face, he took 2 steps forward and spread his arms as if he wanted to give her a goodbye hug. Huang Baozhuang blushed and took 2 steps back. How could Su Fengnian, who grew up surrounded by rouge and powder, give up just like that? He continued to shamelessly take 2 steps forward, and there was even a hint of pitiful innocence on his face that seemed to come from the bottom of his heart. Shan Jianqing of the chess, sword and music school became even more bashful, his cheeks like peach blossoms, and he took a step back. 2 steps to 1 step. How could the experienced playboy His Royal Highness not know the mystery behind it? Did he think that the countless gold, silver, jewelry, and silk were given for free? Su Fengnian hugged the woman who didn't like him but just wasn't good at rejecting him. He sniffed her hair that was tied up with a red sandalwood hairpin and smiled mischievously. In the future, I'll go to the chess and sword music school to find you when I have the chance. If you feel that you're at a disadvantage when I hug you, you can hug me back. Finally, he was willing to let go of Huang Baozhuang. He did not know if it was because of the pearl in her mouth or because of her innate talent as the dragon concubine, but her body was as cool as a spring in the summer and as warm as a jade in the winter. Su Fengnian stepped out from her side, deliberately not looking at her tearful and aggrieved expression. With one hand supporting himself on the city wall, he leaped down the city wall and left Yanhui Pass, heading toward the desert. Huang Baozhuang stood at the top of the city wall in a daze. She had once heard from her master, who had traveled all over the world, that there were wild geese from the south returning to the north at Yanhui Pass, passing through with reed leaves in their mouths. If she was lucky, she might even be able to see the mirage. She had mustered up the courage to ask the manor head for permission to go on this trip. After a long time, Huang Baozhuang's body suddenly stiffened. She slowly turned around and saw 2 people standing at the end of the blue brick corridor. She relaxed and smiled. In Huang Baozhuang's vision, there were 2 men standing side by side. One of them was unbelievably tall and sturdy. He was almost as tall as Huang Baozhuang and Su Fengnian. This giant's skin was a rare golden copper color. The giant man who looked like an immortal from the heavens had a wooden expression. Beside him stood a man who looked even sharper than him. He looked to be in his early 30s and held a string of heads that looked like candied haws. Some of the heads had dried blood and their faces looked dry. Some of the heads still had blood dripping down, but they were still vivid and lifelike. Old Gu Song's head was among them. He must have been extremely terrified before his death because the facial features on his head were twisted. If His Royal Highness was still at the top of the city wall, he would definitely mistake this person for the young Wang Xianji from Marshall the Arch City. They didn't look alike, but they were too alike. The man who looked to be in his 30s handed the huge string of candied haws to the bronze man beside him. He walked towards Huang Baozhuang and smiled. Only Huang Baozhuang would think that he was smiling. Any ordinary person who had some worldly wisdom would feel a chill all over their body when they saw this man smile. This was because his eyes didn't have pupils and only had a strange silvery white color. He took out the Qingfu Sword Codex and stared at Huang Baozhuang for a moment before he slowly said, "I went to the Beiliang border city with the bronze man to return a gift to that Chen Jibao who killed our Beimang royal family. On the way back, I picked up a few secret manuals. This Qingfu Sword Codex should be given to you. I won't hand it over to the prefecture lord." After this man handed over the Qingfu Sword Codex, he didn't say anything else. He rose from the ground and pierced into the sky like a feather arrow. The entire top of the city wall shook with his step. Huang Baozhuang saw this senior martial brother step on the back of a large goose that was at the front of the line and flew towards the north. She held the Qingfu Sword Codex with pure reverence in her eyes. This senior martial brother was Hong Jingyan. He once pointed to his eyes while playing chess and said that in the entire world, he only saw two people. One was Wang Xianji and the other was Tuoba. Huang Baozhuang's bronze man grandmaster's left shoulder tilted downwards. She jumped up with a smile and stood on his shoulder. In the desert shrouded in moonlight, the bronze giant carried 6 or 7 heads in its hands and ran wildly towards the north with the woman. In Beimang, only a few immortal mansions like the chess and sword music school would have this scene of rolling green mountains. Huang Baozhuang liked this 6th-class name from the bottom of her heart. She didn't want to lie to this home that didn't have any family. Secretly hiding something was already her limit. In the silent night, the old scholar carried a heavy bamboo bookcase to the top of the city wall. He looked at the shattered stone tablet and shook his head in pity, muttering to himself about the younger generation. The old man with a face full of hardship stood alone below the platform. He had been away from his home for more than 20 years. Whether it was because of homesickness or some other mischievous thoughts, it was time to return home. Chapter 409. Su Fengnian finally caught up with the fish dragon gang before they entered the city. It was not a pleasant journey for the whole night and 2 days. After his ocean of qi was severely damaged by the woman, more than 300 aperture acupoints were turned upside down. Later, he found that she had implanted a lot of external qi as sharp as sword qi. It was extremely difficult to peel off the cocoon. In order not to delay the cultivation of the sword, Su Fengnian almost went crazy after removing those disgusting and impure qi. It was like looking for a few ants and cicadas in the huge Yanhui Pass. It was extremely difficult. However, he still delayed the sword for a day, and Su Fengnian scolded him all the way. Fortunately, this kind of extremely delicate and laborious work was similar to the way he carved the chess pieces in the Qingshuwei Pavilion sword practice record on Mount Wudong. It had an indescribable benefit for digging deeper into the mystery of the big yellow courtyard. The big yellow courtyard was like a sword embryo. Old Man Li's 2-sleeved green snake was hammered by the weight of 10,000 caddies, while the latter was the quenching of the famous sword when it was finished. Both were indispensable. After Su Fengnian reunited with the fish dragon gang, he stopped the basic secret skill of the big yellow court. Young Wang Dashi was very happy. Lu Nerong and Gong Sun Yang, who must have bought the bowstring, nodded to Su Fengnian. The city of Leaving was as prosperous as the big city of Lingzhou in the hinterland of Beiliang. The people of the fish dragon gang, who were desolate after coming out of the Tuma Pass, no longer felt angry and hostile. They only felt that they had finally come back to life. Su Fengnian had a forged letter from the former army supervisor of weapons. The handwriting was exactly the same, but the content was changed. The seal was even more genuine, even the ink paste was taken from the treasures on this Wuxian official's desk. Ordinary people could not imagine that the boorish general would fall in love with the Kuei Hong ink paste from the House of Eight Treasures. This further confirmed the absolute authenticity of the secret letter. According to the introduction in the letter, Su Fengnian had transformed into the nephew of a distinguished guest in the general's mansion, and his surname was Su. Su Fengnian naturally knew the address of the meeting. After entering the city, he asked someone for the way. Su Fengnian led the fish dragon gang to a mansion that was actually built by officials and businessmen in Jiangnan. After the gatekeeper reported the secret letter, a thin old man in luxurious silk walked out. His footsteps were hurried. After seeing Su Fengnian, they first bowed to each other. The old man asked the gatekeeper to settle the people of the fish dragon gang. Then he warmly took Su Fengnian's arm and stepped over the threshold together. He laughed and said, "I have been friends with Brother Qi for many years. Sister-in-law's frosty eggplant was delicious. Even now, when I think about it, I still drool. There is no such delicacy in leaving city." Su Fengnian looked embarrassed and said, "Sister-in-law's eggplant is too spicy and salty. Uncle Wei is used to it." The thin old man squinted and smiled. He nodded slightly and held Su Fengnian's arm more tightly. He laughed and said, "Spicy and salty is the best way to eat. How are Brother Qi and sister-in-law's health?" Su Fengnian sighed with a gloomy face, "Sister-in-law's health is good. It's just that uncle has an old lung disease when he was young. He can't get rid of it. When it rains, he coughs non-stop. It's worrying." The old man was silent for a while and said in a low voice, "I have some snow lotuses here. You can bring some back for Brother Qi and stew it with rock sugar. It can nourish the stomach and lungs." Su Fengnian made a gesture of wanting to bow in gratitude. The old man quickly supported him and pretended to be angry. "You child, we're all family. Why are you treating us as outsiders?" Although the land in Luqing wasn't as expensive as in the cities of the two dynasties, it still cost 60 to 70,000 taels of silver to buy a decent residence. The residence of the old man surnamed Wei was a large residence with 5 entrances. It was impossible to buy it without 150,000 taels of silver. If there was such a residence in Great Peace City, it would be the envy of many third-rank officials who had been officials for many years. Going around the screen wall and the fake mountain, they walked along the central path. On the 2 sides, there was an accountant's house and a family school. The hall was grand and magnificent. Further in was the flower hall where banquets and music were held. There would most likely be a small pond filled with lotus flowers. This was probably the common characteristic of the residences of Jiangnan officials and merchants. The courtyard was deep, elegant, and quiet. Su Fengnian saw the armchairs in the hall that didn't quite match the style of Jiangnan. He smiled slightly and said, "Uncle Wei really is nostalgic. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used these southern Tang beauty seats." The old man sat and talked with Su Fengnian, Lu Nerong, and Gong Sunyang. When the 3 guests were seated, he placed his butt on the beauty seats and smiled from the bottom of his heart. "In this life, I won't be able to return to my roots, but I have to remember where I'm from, right?" The old man sat down with a dozen or so shops in Luqing. He exchanged polite greetings with Lu Nerong and Gong Sunyang. Compared to Su Fengnian, who was his nephew, he was clearly much colder. He quickly stood and said, "I'm going to personally count the goods. I have to sell them for a good price for the military inspector. Otherwise, I can't afford to lose face. No need to see me off. Treat this as your own home." The 2 young and pretty servant girls stayed in the hall to serve people. Naturally, they were closer to Master Su, who was more like a relative to the old master. The tea had only cooled a little before they asked Master Su delicately if he wanted to change the tea. Chapter 410. In the accounting room, old Fart Wei looked at the main hall through the window. He seemed to have remembered something. With his back to the three accountants, he took out the secret letter from his sleeve and dipped it in his saliva. Then, he used his yellowed fingernail to scratch the seal. He wiped it with his saliva and sniffed it. He heaved a sigh of relief and put the letter back into his sleeve. He nodded and muttered, "It's this smell. This business trip is not bad." Old Fart Wei, who was able to lay a foundation in Luqing, narrowed his eyes and dozed off. He then smiled knowingly, "Since you are really Brother Chi's distant nephew, and you have worked hard on this journey, as your uncle, shouldn't I go to the Golden Phoenix Pavilion to invite you back? It's just that I don't know what this nephew likes. If it's something bland, it would save me a lot of money and trouble. Choshui and Chun, the two maids in the main hall would be good. This old uncle is already so old. I have the heart but not the strength to eat." Before entering the city, Lu Nurong had reminded the gang members to be careful when living under someone else's roof. Actually, she was overthinking. Along the way to the north, the Fish Dragon gang was no longer as complacent as when they first left Lingzhou. This trip to Beimang, they had seen the arrogance and treachery of the military family's disciples. They had also personally experienced the cruel methods of the soldiers. They had also seen the scene of the Jianghu people snatching the secret manuals. They had already been polished to the point that they did not have any temper to speak of. Especially the three strong young men who had followed Miss Lu into Yanhui Pass. They spoke of the lady's shining white thighs, her heavy twin peaks, and how she had stomped a big hole in the strong men. This made the Fish Dragon gang members even more terrified. Old Fart Wei, who had been calculating all his life, was very meticulous. He first asked the housekeeper to sound out the situation. After the dinner, the nephew nodded his head and Miss Lu from the Fish Dragon gang tacitly agreed. After the banquet, he sent people to bring the members of the Fish Dragon gang to the brothel in Luyu City to drink. The brothel was not the highest grade in the city. It was not that old Fart Wei could not afford it, but he was afraid of causing trouble. The brothel was the most unreasonable place in the city. Old Fart Wei had a lot of assets, but in the northern Mang, silver could make the devil turn the millstone. The premise was that you had to let the silver pass through the hands of the rich and powerful first. It was fine to do business with these people, but if you were jealous of them in the brothel, they would fall out faster than flipping a book. Old Fart Wei did not want to get into trouble just because of his relationship with the weapons supervisor house. The Wei residents intentionally or unintentionally arranged for Lu Nurong and Su Fingnian to stay in the room at the back of the flower hall, separated from the rest of the Fish Dragon gang. Su Fingnian's bath and change of clothes were taken care of by two delicate and pretty maids. His Royal Highness did not blush with shame, but the two maids who had never done such things before were extremely embarrassed. After changing into a fresh set of clothes, Su Fengnian walked out of the room and knocked on the door next door. Lu Nurong opened the door and remained silent. She sat by the window and looked at the pool. The cool breeze brushed past her face. Compared to the previous trip to the desert, it was like being in a fairyland. Su Fengnian picked up a pear and took a bite. He asked, "Are you still angry about the Fish Dragon gang going to the brothel?" Lu Nurong glared fiercely at this bastard who said that going to the brothel was as normal as eating. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Fortunately, I am not a member of the Fish Dragon gang. Otherwise, I would be angered to death by you, the future gang leader. It was not easy for me to survive until I reached Lu City. My eyes are burning with anger. My Miss Lu, of course you don't have any thoughts as a woman, but do you think it is easy for a man?" Lu Nurong said angrily, "Then why don't you do that kind of dirty business?" Su Fengnian suddenly felt sad and his face was full of desolation. Lu Nurong was confused. After looking at each other for a while, she seemed to have discovered an earth-shattering secret. For the first time, she showed a sympathetic look and asked in a low voice, "You can't do it?" Su Fingnian took a bite of the juicy pear and said angrily, "It's none of your business whether I can do it or not." Lu Nerong's expression was very strange, as if she had confirmed that fact. She very considerately changed the topic and asked, "When we reach Lu City, there shouldn't be any problems, right?" Su Fingnian nodded and said, "Generally speaking, with Wei Feng's ability, this transaction is considered a success. When you return to Lingzhou, he will secretly take care of you." Lu Nerong said angrily, "Since he has this ability, why didn't he help earlier?" Su Fingnian calmly asked back, "Is he your father or are you his daughter-in-law? Why do you need to spend money and favors to help? Don't tell me that this deal has anything to do with Wei Feng. For an old fox like him who doesn't lack money, if the fish dragon gang doesn't have the ability to send it to Luqing, then they can forget about getting close to him in the future. After all, he is a prominent figure in Luqing. Do you really think that an off-duty weapons supervisor in Lingzhou is a big shot? It's just because of his feelings. If it succeeds, everyone will be happy and get money. If it doesn't, then Wei Feng will just lose some dispensable incense money. When doing business, in the end, other than the goods, you also have to put the person's ability on the scale to calculate the weight. If your fish dragon gang wants to live comfortably, in the end, you still have to work hard. If you become the leading gang in Lingzhou, Wei Feng might have to turn around and curry favor with you." Lu Nerong was sad. They looked at each other for a long time without saying anything. She who had been in a trance suddenly followed this guy's line of sight and looked down. Wasn't it her legs? Lu Nerong flew into a rage out of humiliation. "Damn rogue, where are you looking?" That guy actually slammed the table confidently, scaring her. He said shamelessly, "Is it against the law?" Chapter 411. When the servant girl brought a pot of tea and left, Gong Sun Yang gently locked the door and poured a cup of tea. It was a white porcelain cup of light green tea, sparkling and lovely. He picked up the cup but put it down. His feet were poisoned, so he endured the pain and took off his shoes and socks. He was over 40 years old, but he was still standing. Gong Sun Yang looked out the window and sighed. He endured the pain and took off his shoes and socks, lost in thought. In his youth, wherever the iron hooves of the Su royal banner passed, not even a blade of grass would grow. With a thunderous momentum, they stormed the western Shu imperial city. When the grievous news of his father's death came, his grandfather wrote a suicide poem and sacrificed himself for the country. It was said that Shu was second only to West Chu. Their suicide poems were the most popular in the 8 kingdoms. Although the old emperor of Shu was mediocre and incompetent at governing, it was precisely because he was such an incapable ruler that when he was taken away by his loyal servants, he passed by the Qingyun street where the officials of Shu gathered. It was filled with the cries of their families after the officials died. Most of the people who fled were like him, young boys and girls. There were very few young men who took off their official robes and mingled with the refugees. Who would have thought that those men who stayed at home, drank all the wine, hung themselves, and slit their throats with swords would have been cursing the emperor in court just a day ago? Perhaps they had just suffered the humiliation of being flogged a month ago. The Gongsun family of Shu was good at using arrows in rapid succession. Gongsun Yang reached out to touch the reloaded horn bow on the table. Tears streamed down his face and his lips trembled. There was a knock on the door. Gongsun Yang quickly wiped away his tears and calmed his mind. He said to wait, put on his shoes and socks, and limped to open the door. Seeing that it was young Master Su, the latter said self-deprecatingly, "I was chased by Miss Lu with a sword, so I could only escape to Senior Gongsun to avoid disaster." Gongsun Yang laughed softly and said, "It just so happens that there is a pot of good tea here. It is better to enjoy it together than to enjoy it alone." Su Fingnian closed the door and sat down at the table. He poured himself a cup of tea and drank it in one gulp. Gong Sun Yang moved the horn bowl and held the thin porcelain cup with 2 fingers. He slowly drank the cold tea. Su Fengnian reached out to pour the tea. He paused and asked, "There is something I don't know if I should say." Gong Sun Yang's heart sank, but his expression remained the same. "Young Master Su, please speak your mind." After Su Fengnian finished pouring the tea, he stroked the edge of the thin cup with 1 finger and said calmly, "I have inquired with the local people in Yanhuiguan. There is only one long-established bao shop in the city. The old man surnamed Zhang has a cold temperament. If you can't pull the 2 stone bows at the door, he won't do business with you. Bao Changzhang, I think it is most likely a fake surname. This shop was easy to find and inquire about. With the strength of Elder Gongsuan's arms, he shouldn't have been stopped at the door. Then, I accidentally learned from Miss Liu that Senior Gongsun only arrived at the city gate after 2 hours. With Senior's feelings for the fish dragons, he wouldn't deliberately leave Miss Liu and the 3 members of the fish dragons in a dangerous place like Yanhui Pass. Then I guess that Senior didn't have much money with him, so he spent more than half an hour bargaining there. But on second thought, it seemed unlikely. With Senior's experience in Jianghu, and he is also a master of continuous arrows, he should know the market price of string silk. So I asked myself, is it because Senior Gongsun and that old man Zhang are old friends? Is it because they are catching up? But I was curious, how close was their relationship that the future leader of the fish dragons had to wait for half an hour at the city gate? Senior Gongsun, can you tell me? Gong Sun Yang hesitated for a moment. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Senior, don't worry. Take your time. I just came to drink tea and chat. I can afford to wait." Gong Sun Yang put down the teacup and asked slowly, "Did the military supervisor of weapons and young Master Su set a trap for the fish dragons?" Su Fengnian sneered, "Gong Sun Yang, you are you, and the fish dragons are the fish dragons. At this time, you still want to confuse the public. There is no doubt that the fish dragons have a clean background. Lu Narong and even Xiao Chang were kept in the dark by you. This deal was facilitated by you. What I want to know now is what information you gave to old man Zhang. Was it the military defense map of Beiliang? Or was it the distribution of the Beiliang army? I think it was a combination of both. That's why you stayed in the bao shop for so long. What kind of big pie did the Northern Mang paint for you? Is it to recover Western Shu in the future? Or is it to destroy the Beiliang cavalry? Or is it to support the Gongsun family of Western Shu?" Gongsun Yang's expression was complicated. He said, "Since young Master Su still dares to attend the meeting alone, I think it's not wrong. Young Master Su hides his strength and is at least at the 2nd stage. Gong Sun Yang just wants to know how much money young Master Su can earn with the head on my shoulder and the bao shop in Yanhui Pass. How much can he earn?" Chapter 412. Su Fengnian glanced at Gong Sun Yang's hands, which were resting on the edge of the table, and said with a smile, "I can even kill Xiao Chang. Killing you, Gong Sun Yang, who has fallen back to 3rd rank, won't be difficult. Besides, how far are we from each other? Even if you manage to raise your horn bow and quiver and pull away enough distance for a string of arrows, do you really think you can escape from the Wei estate? Will Wei Feng let Beimang know that a son of a Beiliang general has come to the city? At that time, not to mention Wei Feng and I, the fish dragons will be the first to die tragically. Loyalty, filial piety, and righteousness don't need to be mentioned. Loyalty and righteousness, to you, Gong Sun Yang, seems to be dispensable." The mild-tempered Gong Sun Yang's face turned ferocious. His 10 fingers grabbed the edge of the table like hooks, but he still didn't make a sound. The table trembled slightly, causing the 2 cups of tea to ripple. The aroma of the tea grew stronger. Su Fengnian stretched out 2 fingers to press down on the thin, white, and translucent teacup. He lowered his head to look at the surface of the tea in the cup and said emotionlessly, "Have you ever thought about how a single Gongsun Yang, or perhaps several hundred people like you who have been hibernating in northern Liang without regard for their lives and live like dogs? Yes, you have racked your brains to send information to northern Mang in an unending stream, wishing that you could break northern Liang's foundation day and night. But if there really comes a day when Beiliang's 300,000 cavalrymen are all wiped out under Beimang's all-out attack, the entire Beiliang will be filled with smoke, and everyone will be satisfied. But when the north gate is opened, how many people will die in the old western Shu, the old southern Tang, the old eastern Yu, and the old west Chu? 20 years ago, you were a stray dog. Even as a stray dog these years, you still have a strong sense of righteousness, not hesitating to flirt with the Beimang barbarians for the sake of national enmity. If the Beiliang cavalry really is defeated one day, all the Han people in the world will change into barbarians' clothes. How interesting. Gongsun Yang, I really admire you survivors of a perished country who remember the righteousness of spring and autumn. Without waiting for Gongsun Yang to retort, Su Fengnian, who seemed to have lost interest, flicked his finger, and the porcelain cup filled with tea began to spin, not spilling a single bit of tea. Looking at the teacup, Su Fengnian said self-deprecatingly, "It's quite boring to say such empty words." Gongsun Yang said, "As long as young Master Su can promise not to drag the fish dragons into the fire, Gongsun Yang is willing to surrender." Gongsun Yang's Gongsun Yang, Gongsun Yang's Gongsun Yang. Senior Gongsun, please don't test me. If I have any ulterior motives towards the fish dragon gang, I have 100 ways to destroy them. I will help you pick up the word "gi" that you lost. I'll give you the word loyalty as well. How about that? Gongsun Yang's cloudy eyes gradually became clear. He leaned back and leaned heavily on the back of the chair. He looked like a short-sighted old farmer who didn't know where to put his life after carrying a burden for so many years. Now, he could finally take a break. Gongsun Yang smiled, "Now I know that there are benefits to being alone. I'm sorry to old gang leader Liu. Ni Rong is a good girl. I hope young Master Su can treat her well. I'll have to rely on young Master Su to take care of her when she returns to Lingzhou. As for how to explain it to her, I'm sure with young Master Su's wisdom, it won't be too difficult." Su Fengnian shook his head, "You don't need me to explain anything." As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Nerong, who had accidentally come to Gongsun Yang's place to discuss business, finally couldn't hold it in anymore. She suddenly pushed open the door. As tough as she was, she bit her lips and shook her head, "Uncle Gongsun, don't die." She was dejected and powerless. "Let's go back to Lingzhou together, okay?" Gongsun Yang rubbed his eyes and didn't look at Lu Ni Rong. He said softly, "It's a pity that I don't have any wine. Young Master Su, it shouldn't be a problem to drink a cup of tea, right?" Just as he reached out his hand, he stopped. He, who was about to die, muttered to himself, "It's better to go down and drink to my heart's content. I'll have to trouble young Master Su to take Lu Ni Rong out." Su Fengnian said coldly with a heart of stone, "Gongsun Yang, I'll watch you die." Lu Ni Rong said heartbreakingly, "Surnamed Su, are you still human?" Gongsun Yang, on the other hand, was even calmer. He smiled, "That's good. Only then can I be considered completely dead. Ni Rong, tell old gang leader that Gongsun Yang has let down the fish dragon gang all these years. His death wasn't unjust." Lu Ni Rong was unusually quiet. She didn't look at Gongsun Yang, but stared at Su Fengnian with her red eyes. There's no more Gongsun Yang in the world. Gongsun Yang closed his eyes and straightened his back. He straightened his clothes and smashed his fists on his temples. He collapsed on the chair. Lu Ni Rong covered her mouth. Blood seeped through the gaps between her fingers. Su Fengnian turned his head and said, "Don't be in a hurry to cut ties with me. Don't think about leaving without the goods. If that's really the case, Gong Sun Yang's death will be in vain. As for what you hate me for, you can come up with a plan after returning to Bailiang. After leaving the Tumbling Horse Pass, I can kill Xiao Chang. In Bailiang, I can force Gong Sun Yang to die. Lu and I Rong, don't join in the fun now. Lu and I Rong released her palm. Her mouth was full of blood. She said coldly, "Tell me your real name." Su Fengnian thought for a while and pointed at the Spring Thunder Saber. "If I can return to Bailiang alive, you'll know who I am." Lu and I Rong said firmly, "Xiao Chang didn't betray the Fish Dragon Gang. You killed him." Su Fengnian looked at her for a while. He didn't say anything, but he still nodded. "Good. When I get to Lingzhou, I'll burn incense and worship Buddha. I'll ask Bodhisattva to bless you to return to Bailiang alive." Lu and I Rong turned around resolutely. Su Fengnian sat on the chair indifferently. He stared at the 2 cups of tea that neither of them had time to drink. He wanted to tease her by saying, "What a beautiful pair of legs. They're gone just like that." But when he saw the blood flowing from the corner of the old man's mouth, he didn't say anything. He just leaned over and gently wiped it with his sleeve. Chapter 413. The owner of the house, Wei Fengchu, flew into a rage when he heard about the death. Chushui, the maid who came to deliver the news secretly, was so scared that she kept quiet out of fear. However, after years of nourishing his body, Wei Fengchu was no longer like an ordinary merchant, but more like a scholar. He immediately suppressed his shock and anger and let Chushui lead the way. This second-class maid was afraid of delaying the master's business, so she walked quickly. At first, Wei Fengchu didn't say anything and followed her into the courtyard. Walking in the narrow and dark corridors on both sides, Wei Fengchu coughed. The maid, who was carefully trained and sold to the Wei mansion at a high price, quickly slowed down. She looked back and saw that the master was deep in thought. She obediently walked forward with small steps. Wei Fengchu, who had experienced countless storms in the business world, took this time to weigh the pros and cons. According to Chushui, young Master Su went to the house of the old man with the horn bow, and not long after, this murder happened. It seemed that he had a conflict with the woman named Lu Narong from the Fish Dragon Gang. Wei Fengchu rubbed his temples and rubbed his temples. Wei Feng rubbed his temples. When he was close to the house where the corpse was, he signaled Qiu Shui to stay in the corridor. Then, he quickened his steps and walked into the house with a worried expression. He did not reprimand his nephew who came from afar but locked the door. Seeing that the young man was so calm after killing someone, he thought more highly of him. A playboy killed someone in his own yard. This kind of lawless calmness was not something to be seen in public. To cause trouble in someone else's house, he was either very shrewd or had someone to rely on. No matter what, Wei Feng felt that it was a good thing. He thought that Brother Qi did not have a son, but he had a distant nephew who was worth cultivating. No wonder this business was led by such a young man. A 30,000 taels business was really not small. Wei Fengchu immediately calmed down and moved a chair to sit down. He didn't show any anxiety and asked, "What do you need Uncle Wei to do?" Su Fengnian had thought of a set of words that could justify himself. Even if it wasn't perfect, it was enough to temporarily deal with an old fox like Wei Feng. Of course, the premise was that Lu Narong didn't go crazy and mess things up. He didn't expect Wei Feng to not ask anything, which surprised Su Fengnian. The reason why he dared to tell Wei Feng at the first moment was that he pretended to be the son of a general in Lingzhou. He was sure that Wei Feng wouldn't dare to go to the yamen and splash dirty water on him. As long as Wei Feng thought that he could work in the Wei mansion, then there was a discussion. Seeing his nephew's expression, Wei Feng took a look at his face. He poured a cup of herbal tea and smiled. "Nephew Su, to tell you the truth, even the granddaughter of the gang leader, Lu Narong, as long as she is in Uncle Wei's house, you can do whatever you want, as long as she is in my house, of Uncle Wei's. What? The Yaman. Do you think the Yaman, the guest of the a small gang like the Fish Dragon gang? Ling Ling. To Ling, though the Yaman of the armies of even if Uncle Wei lent the Fish Dragon gang 10 times the guts, would they dare? Nephew Su, Uncle Wei, and Brother Chi are friends who have gone through life and death together, so we don't speak politely. Prostitutes are heartless, actors are unrighteous, and merchants are greedy for money. The old saying is true, but it doesn't mean that people like Uncle Wei don't care about friendship at all. When he saw his nephew stand up and bow again, Wei Feng glared at him and scolded with a smile, "Nephew, you must have learned this habit from the landowning households of Lingzhou. In the future, if you want to make a name for yourself in Lingzhou's northern Mang, this pedantic scholarly style cannot be the first. Why don't you try to bow again? See if I don't kick you out of the house. When in northern Mang, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. It's better for you to drink big bowls of wine and eat big chunks of meat." Originally, this old uncle wanted to let the servants bring you around the city to enjoy the scenery. Don't even think about it. Just stay by this old uncle's side for the next 2 days and watch how the business is done. Brother Qi is full of brotherhood in the Jianghu. Uncle Wei is far inferior to Brother Qi when it comes to wielding swords and spears. However, you don't have any other skills, but you know the ways of the world that can be exchanged for real money. Su Fengnian raised his cup and said with a bitter smile, "Uncle Wei, I'll replace wine with tea." Cheers. Wei Feng said with relief, "That's not bad." After drinking the tea, he got up and poured a cup for Wei Feng. After sitting down, Su Fengnian said slowly, "Uncle Wei, I still have to tell you about this matter today, otherwise it won't be good. The eldest son of the general has always coveted the Fish Dragon gang and Lu Nerong. He wants to take her as his concubine. Originally, the Fish Dragon gang's strength was not among the best in Lingzhou, so it was impossible for them to win this business. However, since the eldest son is selfish, he can't be judged by common sense. The deputy leader of the Beimang gang, Xiao Chang, has a son called Xiao Ling, who is Lu Nerong's childhood sweetheart. There is news that when Xiao Chang returns to Lingzhou to wash his hands, he will take the opportunity to propose marriage between Xiao Ling and Lu Nerong. How could the eldest son let the father and son of the Xiao family get what they want? Therefore, after leaving Tuma Pass, I have some martial arts skills. According to the eldest son's instructions, I was lucky enough to kill Xiao Chang and frame a few horse gangs. I didn't expect that the guest Gong Sun Yang would notice the clues and threaten to tell Lu Nerong and the Fish Dragon gang. Therefore, I had no choice but to fall out with them. I roughly set up a trap and only told Lu Nerong that Gong Sun Yang is a remnant of the spring and autumn period who secretly colluded with the Beimang. This way, I barely managed to calm the simple-minded Lu Nerong. "Uncle Wei, are there any flaws in this plan? If I ruin the eldest son's plan, even if I bring money back, I won't be able to make a name for myself in the general's residence." Presumably, Uncle Wei also knows that although the second son is born of a concubine, he is quick-witted and has made some achievements in Lingzhou's scholarly circles. Therefore, the mother and son are quite favored. The second son has deliberately tried to rope them in again and again, which has already made the eldest son dissatisfied. This trip to Beimang is both an opportunity and a crisis for me. If I succeed, everything will be fine. If not, I'm afraid I won't even have a foothold. Wei Feng's eyes revealed a trace of the elder's appreciation of the younger generation. He smiled and nodded, stroking his beard. Even though he was sitting next to a dead person, he still said slowly, "Nephew, you are able to plan step by step on small matters and have good foresight on big matters. Not bad, not bad. You are a promising talent." Su Fengnian lowered his voice and blushed. "Before I left, I wanted to shamelessly ask for a letter from my uncle so that he could put in a good word for me to Uncle Wei. However, when Auntie started at the dinner table, she was scolded by Uncle Wei. He said that a man who wants to start a family has to do everything himself. Asking for charity is not a damn skill. Fortunately, Auntie slapped the bowl and said that she would cook tomorrow, so Uncle Wei didn't continue to scold me. Wei Feng laughed and pointed his finger at Su Fengnian. This was the first time the old fox laughed so comfortably. Then he sighed and said, "It is indeed Brother Qi and Auntie's temper." When Uncle Wei was young and down, he freeloaded for 3 years. Although Auntie occasionally complained, it was because she was angry that I didn't strive for it and lamented my misfortune. She hoped that I would have a bright future, not because she was stingy with those bowls of rice that didn't come easily. She also had bad intentions and looked down on me. Uncle Wei didn't have the realm to repay a drop of water with a gushing spring. However, no matter how heartless Wei Feng was, he didn't dare to forget the kindness of living for 3 years. These years, Uncle Wei could be considered to have built up a large family business, but Brother Qi and Auntie never sent a letter to him. They were afraid that if they had something to ask of him, it would reduce their friendship. Brother Qi and Auntie were kind, but how could they not be cruel? They were already half a foot into the ground. Who knows when they would fall asleep and never wake up again? Why should they care about these things? Now that your nephew is in Uncle Wei's house, good, good. No letter from home is better than 1,000 words. Su Fengnian whispered, "Uncle Wei, find a good place to bury this guest of the Fish Dragon Gang. Is there any trouble?" Chapter 4:14. Wei Feng waved his sleeves and said, "It's not worth mentioning. However, Uncle Wei will speak frankly. Compared to the relationship with the weapons supervisor, you have to value your relationship with Brother Qi more. Therefore, it's okay if your relationship with Lu Nerong is stiff for a while, but you can't ignore her forever. In the future, if she enters the general's manor as a concubine and is favored, you have to know that a woman's ability is greater than anything else. If you're not careful, you'll be smashing your own foot with a rock. There are too many examples of this, so you have to be careful. To Uncle Wei, you're superior in both appearance and intelligence. You might as well go all the way and use some methods to capture Lu Nerong's heart. If she's like a fish in water in the general's manor, you'll have another backer. Wealth comes from danger. As long as you don't sully her body, I believe that with your prudence, it won't be difficult to pull chestnuts out of the fire. Since ancient times, those who achieve great things must have a few close female friends by their side." Su Fengnian was surprised. Wei Feng smiled and said, "If you can flirt with Lu Nerong, who still hates you today, before you leave the city, Uncle Wei promises to give you 8,000 taels of silver. Treat it as your expenses for managing your connections inside and outside the general's manor." Su Fengnian shamelessly bargained, "Uncle Wei, I'm a scoundrel who only cares about money. How about we round it up to 10,000 taels of silver?" Wei Feng was not angry but happy. He laughed heartily. What an exorbitant demand. Uncle Wei likes it, so I'll agree. Su Fengnian smiled brightly. Wei Feng stood up and smiled playfully. The two maids in the manor are very clean and pure. There's a saying in Beimang to rear horses. These horses are not ordinary horses. Most of them are carefully selected from the Liang dynasty's Jiangnan. They're young girls who are bought at a high price. They're taught how to play the zither, go, calligraphy, painting, poetry, tea, and wine. After a few years, only 3 or 4 of the 10 beauties will mature. This pair of maids can be considered outstanding. If they're placed outside the manor, they'll be worth 50 gold. Your nephew likes it, so I'll give it to you. There's not much use in keeping it in the Wei manor. It's good that you can bring it back to Lingzhou. You can get on good terms with those scholars who pretend to be cultured. With this pair of clever people, you'll get twice the result with half the effort." Su Fengnian, who was surprised, quickly smiled and said, "Thank you, Uncle Wei." Wei Feng walked to the door and said softly, "Old uncle will find an opportunity to have the servant girl, Chushui, pass on some words to Lu Nerong. She will say that the Wei family has already buried this foreign official according to nephew's wishes. Having someone pass on the message will be more sincere than you personally explaining it. Don't worry, Chushui has a delicate heart. That Lu Nerong is inexperienced and won't be able to see any flaws." Su Fengnian praised, "Uncle Wei's plan is flawless. Nephew has learned a lot. It's fortunate that the stubborn brother Qi has such a sweet-tongued nephew like you." Wei Feng shook his head and laughed. He seemed to have remembered something and asked in an unconcerned manner, "Nephew, do you know much about poetry and painting? How is your handwriting?" Uncle Wei has gone with the flow these past few years and spent a lot of money to buy over 100 types. Most of them were plundered at a low price from the remnants of the spring and autumn period who fled to northern Mang's territory. There are few knowledgeable figures in the Wei estate. Uncle Wei is afraid that he will make a mistake and be laughed at by the experts, so he is embarrassed to show them to others. If you, kid, know some tricks, then let this old uncle take a look. If Uncle Wei is in a good mood, I'll take a few. Su Fengnian rubbed his hands and recommended himself. Uncle Wei has suffered greatly in this life because he can't read. As a result, I've been studying diligently to obtain scholarly honors. My handwriting is not bad. Furthermore, I've helped the eldest young master for many years. It's inevitable that I've seen some valuable paintings and paintings that can be verified as fake. I barely have some insight. If Uncle Wei doesn't mind, let me take a look." Uncle Wei sighed helplessly and said, "If I had known, I wouldn't have brought up this pot." After sending Wei Feng out of the room, Su Fengnian saw the graceful servant girl Chushui at the end of the corridor. The corner of his mouth rose. The latter was clever and had guessed that she was already in the hands of this young master. She blushed. When she left with the master, she sweetly looked back and slightly twisted her slender waist to show a different kind of flirtatious charm. Su Fengnian returned to his room and sat down. There was no longer any smile on his face. If a girl like Lu Nirong was present, she would probably only think that the elders were kind and the juniors were well behaved. She would never have noticed the smoke of war and intrigue that filled the air. At that time, when they were talking about letters from home, Su Fengnian knew that there was a small mistake that could not be considered a mistake. Because according to the information about the mercenary surnamed Shi in the general's residence, this person was illiterate and it was impossible for him to write a letter. However, His Royal Highness did not have the thought of testing the old fox Wei Feng. If he lightly brushed it off with a few words, it proved that Wei Feng was certain of his identity and trusted him to the point where he would not nitpick on such a small matter. However, if he could not hold himself back, it meant that Wei Feng still had doubts in his heart. As expected, when His Royal Highness had just set a small trap, the old fox had used calligraphy and painting before he left to quietly set a big trap. Fortunately, His Royal Highness would not capsize in this small ditch. Moreover, Wei Feng's eyesight was not bad. He recognized that this nephew of his was a rare commodity worth hoarding. That was why he generously gave him money and a servant girl. It was all because he wanted Su Fengnian to have a meteoric rise in Lingzhou in the future. His business would naturally receive rich returns. If the old fox was only concerned about their brotherhood in the past, he definitely would not have been so generous. How could a young and inexperienced girl like Lu Nerong not be bullied in this Jianghu where jackals and wolves ran rampant and foxes gathered? Su Fengnian quietly waited for Wei Feng's trusted aide to come and collect the corpse. He stood at the window and muttered to himself, "The Jianghu is sinister. Senior Gongsun, if you're still alive, do you think that what the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over? Don't worry, if I return to Beiliang alive, the fish dragon gang will receive some secret support. If I die in Beimang, you and that narrow-minded Miss Lu will have taken revenge. If I wasn't His Royal Highness, with Senior Gongsun's temperament, we could have become friends despite the difference in age." I know that Senior will definitely not betray anyone, and with that pouch of green ant wine from back then, I won't be the evil person who extorts a confession through torture. However, if I were to say that I knew about Senior's relationship with Northern Mang and still turn a blind eye to it, that would be too difficult for me. I believe that if Senior knew about this in the underworld, he would curse less. After personally watching the two retainers of the Wei family carry away the corpse that was gradually turning cold like tea, Su Fengnian returned to the room. He saw that Lu Narong's door was tightly shut. He thought that it must have been difficult for this honest girl to not fight with her life on the spot. It was very strange. She was indeed an outstanding woman, but in His Highness the Crown Prince's memory, the clearest impression he had of her was not the time she killed the enemy alone in the inn at Toppling Horse Pass, nor was it the time she led the way on the yellow sand of the desert. Instead, it was the time she sat on the hillside with her arms around her knees in a daze, and the time she drank from the well at Yanhui Pass. The Qingming festival was approaching. How could it miss out on the bitter rain that broke the hearts of passers-by? The path to the tombs was muddy so that the later generations could remember their ancestors with every step they took. In the curtain of night, the heavens were not stingy with the pitter-patter of rain. Su Fengnian pushed open the window. The breeze was chilly. He listened to the rain patting the lotus flowers. However, his expression was cold. He wasn't sure if His Royal Highness could hear the bleakness and desolation in his voice. In Beiliang Palace, there should be a puppet with a similar figure. It was wearing the mask that Xu Xiu had meticulously made, carefully playing the role of His Royal Highness. Su Fengnian leaned against the windowsill without a trace of confusion. His eyes were abnormally resolute. At Toppling Horse Pass, he wanted to pull out his saber for the first time. In the end, he failed. At the top of Yanhui Pass, he wanted to pull out the Spring Thunder but failed. Su Fengnian seemed to be admiring the scenery. In fact, he closed his eyes and formed a seal with both hands, washing the qi in his body over and over again. True Yang grows from the root. Yin Fu descends to the yellow court. The river flows endlessly and the spirit is firm. This is the Jinren's great refining form. Su Fengnian stood still like this for a full 2 hours. He slowly exhaled a breath of qi that was like a sword according to the sword qi rolling dragon wall. With a bang, it stirred a lotus flower in the pond and turned it into fine powder in an instant. However, in the boundless curtain of night and rain, who would notice such a shocking detail? Su Fengnian said as if relieved of a heavy burden, so this is the great yellow quartz so-called embroidery of the universe by the mouth, setting Chang and ablaze. Chapter 4:15. His Royal Highness only had 7 unopened acupoints left. After diligently removing the mixed qi that Huang Baozhuang had implanted into his body, he opened a new Ditsang acupoint. Combined with the sword qi that had been nurturing in his body during this period of time, he was able to form sword qi and destroy a lotus. After bathing and changing clothes during the day, he asked the 2 maidservants about it and found out that this lotus was a rare drought hibiscus. Not only could it not grow in water with a great difference in temperature, but it also hated moisture and liked dryness. If the lotus root was soaked in water for too long, it would rot and die. The water storage in the pond was very particular. If it was properly cultivated, it would bloom a few months earlier than normal lotus, and its flowering period was also very long. A single lotus was very valuable, so it was nicknamed the 10 golden lotuses and the fierce woman lotus. Generally, a wealthy family could only grow 1 or 2 lotuses in a vat. They did not have the money nor the energy to take care of 100 lotuses, which was enough to show the depth of the Wei family's wealth. After exhaling a mouthful of sword qi to cut the green lotus, Su Fengnian felt his entire body relax. The circulation of qi was no longer stagnant. The wonders of the big yellow court were endless. The most obvious and straightforward thing was that it had exceptional hearing and vision. Su Fengnian seemed to be following the incantation and closing his eyes to concentrate, but he was actually listening to the slow blooming of a budding lotus. During this process, the sword chi rolled along the dragon wall and flowed violently along his meridians. It was the complete opposite of the bashful unfolding of the flower bud in the pond. Unfortunately, His Highness could only hold on for 2 hours before he could no longer withstand the burst of majestic chi in his body. Presumably, after opening 6 acupores, he could wait for a whole night for a lotus to fully bloom. Su Fengnian stretched and mocked himself. A good man should be able to endure. Su Fengnian sat back in front of the table and weighed his current wealth. Those flying swords would only be priceless after they were cultivated, but they were destined to be a pile of scrap metal in a short period of time. Although the process of drinking blood to become a fetus was very difficult, he did not have the old man with the sheepskin fur coat to temper him. Relying on this stupid method to cultivate the swords was also a kind of training. It was very difficult to find a good thing in the world where you could gain some benefits by suffering some hardships. Once he mastered the nurturing sword, entering the mysterious finger would not be as unreachable as it was now. The 5 pieces of facial skin made by Shu Xiao were very useful. As for the silk armor that he wore, it was invulnerable to water and fire and invulnerable to swords and spears. It was all nonsense. If he really encountered a level 1 master, he wouldn't be able to survive. However, it was still useful to deal with sneak attacks from ordinary swords and sabers. Of the 6 pages in the saber manual, the most useful one was undoubtedly the latest page with detailed analysis of the rolling dragon wall of sword aura. Not only had it inadvertently helped him to break through 1 acupoint, but during this period of time, he had been diligently and tirelessly following the path of complexity rather than simplicity. Only then did he realize that in the beginning, the obscurity and stagnation were very difficult to bear. But once he got used to it, it was as the old saying goes, first bitter, then sweet. The essence of the 12 moves in the stacked thunder armor of the thorny whale, which he had extracted from thousands of secret manuals, had to be repeatedly verified with the divine intent in his mind every day, quietly waiting for the day when he could accumulate enough knowledge and use it. Back then, he had chosen to sneak into the fish dragon gang and rush to Beimang, choosing to use the city as a foothold. Firstly, there were fewer wars in the north of Yuzhou, so there was more space in Jianghu. Secondly, the city magistrate of Beiliang, Tao Qianji, was a person who was bound to die. Not only was he familiar with the art of war and strategy, but his martial prowess was also outstanding, and he had a profound understanding of the military and politics of Beiliang. He was originally the commandant general of Gusai State in the south of Beimang, but because of the extremely unlucky royal family member who was killed by Qin Jibao's surprise troops during a military parade, he was implicated and demoted to the city magistrate of Gusai State. In fact, his official position seemed to have been demoted by 1 rank, but he was actually in charge of the military and politics of Beimang State at the border. It could be considered a blessing in disguise, as he had escaped the confinement of the army. As long as he made some achievements, he would be favored by the governor of Longyao State and even the empress of Beimang. According to the information gathered in Beiliang, Tao Qianji had a unique understanding of military tactics. He was especially good at trickery and had a violent temperament. What was most praised by the Beimang court was that he had to kill a Beiliang soldier every day before he could sleep. He had come to Liuwa city from Gusai province without bringing a single family member, a single cent of silver, or a single treasure. He had only brought 6 prison wagons with him, imprisoning more than 40 captured Beiliang soldiers on the battlefield. After a month, they were all killed. However, Tao Qingmu was very close to many of his fellow generals in the Beimang border army. There would always be new prisoners sent to Liuwa city for him to behead with his own hands every day. It could be said that Tao Qianji was a young official in the Beimang court who was favored by various forces. He had both military skills and a good reputation among the people. Sooner or later, he would be like a carp jumping through the Dragon's Gate and become an indispensable cornerstone of the Beimang court. According to the Beimang's loose city lord, he had 60 armored bodyguards. Tao Qianji himself should have the strength of a second-rank fighter. Su Fengnian weighed the strengths of both sides and smiled sinisterly. Assassinations between the two dynasties were very frequent, but most of them were done by suicide soldiers, so the chances of success weren't high. Beimang had once spent a lot of money to create an assassin team. They asked for 2 to 3 experts from the top sects in the dynasty, as well as more than 100 elite soldiers from the army. A total of 130 people were divided into 3 groups to infiltrate Beiliang, avoiding the main force and attacking the weak. Their targets were all the mid-level military and political officials of Beiliang. However, they didn't expect that the 3 adopted sons, Chen Jibao, Yuan Zuozong, and Chu Lushan, would confidently split into 3 groups and kill them all. This caused the Beimang court to shake. The empress even entered a large-scale purge, and many heads were lost. However, in reality, she only found out a few pawns of the Beimang court that had been hibernating in the Beimang court for many years. The funny thing was that in the end, when they found out that it was the right minister of the Beimang, they found out that one of the spies was a two-faced person. The Beimang didn't refuse any business in Beiliang. Relying on the golden name of the right minister, they wantonly sold military secrets, causing the originally powerful right minister to resign and live in seclusion in the mountains. The enmity between Liang Mang and Liang Mang was not something that could be explained in a few words. It was like a chopping board. Today, it was smeared with your blood, and tomorrow, it would be added with my blood. Layer by layer, it had long solidified into a disgusting blood monument. A gentle knock sounded on the door. Su Fingnian knew that one of Qiu Shuichuan's servants had arrived. He said, "Come in." It was Qiu Shuichun, who was relatively small and delicate. Her skin was white, and she had a slightly round and inconspicuous oval face. For such a small girl, if you used a little bit of force on the bed, you would be worried that you would rub her body. She was worthy of being a little girl worth 50 taels of gold. It was a pity that Su Fingnian had to be a vegetarian monk for every day that he did not have the full yellow courtyard. There were so many women in Wudong Garden who were worth 80 taels of gold and above. His Royal Highness, not to mention his cultivation and other aspects, just his willpower alone was enough to make people sing and cry. The young servant girl carried the food box into the room. Her slender calves quietly came out from under her skirt. Her movements were playful as she hooked the door. Seeing young Master Su look over, she smiled with a red face. She placed the food box on the table and stood to the side with her head lowered. She timidly said, "Sister Qiu Shuichen asked me to warm the bed tonight. I wonder when young master will be resting." She did not have the face to say the words, "serve in bed." She looked at her toes, and her ears were completely red. In reality, during the cold of spring, it was a very common duty for servant girls in large families to warm the bed and warm the quilt. During the hot summer, no matter how tired the servant girls were from fanning themselves, according to the rules, they were not allowed to doze off for an entire night. She and Qiu Shuichen were both jaspers who had been carefully trained and were very familiar with serving their masters. However, they rarely had the opportunity to show their faces in the way manner. Seeing this handsome young master who was highly regarded by the master, their love was far from that of love. It was the natural shyness and timidity of women that was real. Su Fingnian opened the food box and picked up a piece of date cake that melted in his mouth. He raised his head to look at the servant girl. Her face and figure were only 70 taels of gold, but she had a pair of beautiful eyebrows. Her eyebrows were charming, and she had a hidden charm at a young age. She did not know that when she started out in the spring, she was judged by a horse breeder that her eyebrows were worth 30 taels of gold. His Royal Highness had spent a lot of time looking at the beautiful flowers, so his eyesight was not bad. Su Fingnian reached out to pick up a piece of cake and handed it to the girl. He smiled and said, "There is no rush. Sit down and chat first." The little girl softly said, "Oh." She sat slightly sideways across from Su Fingnian. She took the cake with her head still lowered. Her small mouth slightly opened and closed as she ate carefully and slowly. Su Fengnian said something that spoiled the mood. You guys are staying in the city. You should be paying respects to your ancestors and sweeping the tombs. Where would you find yellow paper? It will be the Qingming festival in 2 days. I want to burn paper at the corner of the street to pay my respects to the south. Chapter 4:16. The pretty maidservant raised her head and was about to speak when she realized that she still had some pastries in her mouth. She was afraid that she would be disrespectful to young Master Su and quickly swallowed them down. She reached out her finger to wipe off the pastry crumbs at the corner of her mouth. The maidservant's eyes were naturally filled with love. She smiled softly and said, "Young master, just give me your orders. Chun Nong will prepare them for you tomorrow." Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. He reached out his hand to wipe off the pastry crumbs that were not actually wiped off. He squinted his eyes and teased, "It's here." The maidservant gave him a charming look and lowered her head, not daring to look at him. Choshui knocked on the door and entered. She saw this scene and blushed. She brought over more than 10 famous calligraphies and paintings. Old Master said that he wanted young Master Su to examine them to determine their authenticity. Most of the calligraphies and paintings were made of copper or red sandalwood. They were not light. Su Fengnian stood up and helped to move them to the table. Choshui saw that Chun Nong was still in a daze and secretly tapped her forehead. She softly reprimanded, "Don't you know how to add oil for young master when the lamp is dark?" Chun Nong pouted her lips in grievance. She saw Choshui's slight glare and quickly went to add oil for a white jade Guanyin vase-style oil lamp with a smile. Su Fengnian did not care about this small fuss. He wiped his sleeves with both hands. After Choshui moved the food box away, he slowly spread out a calligraphy and painting on the table. He smiled. It was Qin Chun's painting of flowers in hot summer from the previous dynasty. Unfortunately, the original work was in Bailiang Palace. He was not in a hurry to reveal the truth and rolled it up again. He opened the second scroll. It was Lu Ji's painting of birds in Cassia and Chrysanthemum Mountain. The colors were bright and the strokes were delicate. The blank space for 300 years was densely covered with the seals of later collectors. This was enough to prove the rarity of this calligraphy and painting. Su Fengnian had been influenced by Minister of State Li Yishan for many years. Even without the dazzling array of seals, he knew that it was undoubtedly an authentic work. He closed the scroll again and opened the third scroll. It was the painting of Plum Blossom Hingqin by the late emperor of the Southern Tang dynasty. However, it was a fake. What was interesting was that the latter was obviously better in terms of strokes. After Su Fengnian finished reading it, he said softly, "Choshui, Chun Nong, bring paper and brush." Choshui pulled up her sleeves with 2 fingers and ground with the other hand. Chun Nong did not dare to be lazy and helped to put a paperweight on the calligraphy. Su Fengnian's strokes were slow and leisurely. Choshui and Chun Nong looked at each other and saw the amazement in each other's eyes. They obviously did not expect young Master Su's calligraphy to be so beautiful. It was to the point of concealing it. They admitted that they would not be able to write something like this even if they worked hard for 10 years. Out of the 11 paintings, Su Fengnian purposely could not tell if 3 of them were real or fake. He pretended that he did not dare to speak carelessly and mistook 2 of them as rare. The remaining 6 were all accurate. The last 8 had detailed reasons as to why they were real and fake, as well as their relative valuations. Among them, the valuations and the real situation were both wrong and right. Since the old fox Wei Feng wanted to test him, His Royal Highness could not be too honest. As for the small regular script of more than 100 words, of course he would cover it up. This kind of trick would not be exposed no matter what. After the ink was slightly dry, Chushui could not bear to let go of the small regular script in her hands. She carefully put it into her clothes and bent down to pick up the heavy calligraphy. She was about to go back to her master to hand in the work. Su Fengnian smiled at Chun Nong and said, "Go help Qiushui. She doesn't need to warm the bed today." Chun Nong was half relieved and half disappointed. She opened her eyes wide and looked puzzled. Su Fengnian gently patted her cheek and said, "We'll talk about it after the Qingming festival." Qiushui and Chun Nong walked out of the room together with the calligraphy. There was a servant girl of the same age who came to hold an umbrella for Qiushui in the corridor. She was shocked to see Chun Nong and her initial jealousy faded a little. The smile in her eyes immediately became more sincere. Actually, there was no need to hold an umbrella to block the rain from her master's study to hear. It was just that the calligraphy in her arms was worth a lot and she had to be serious about it, so she had an extra umbrella. The three servant girls walked back together. Naturally, there was a lot of teasing between the girls. Qiushui and Chun Nong came from the same family and they were like sisters. There was a subtle gap between them and the servant girl who came from a different background. However, when intelligent girls interacted with each other, they naturally wore a thick mask with heavy makeup. Su Fengnian closed the door and sat cross-legged on the bed. This was the second time he traveled with Li Chuangong's clay figurine. As long as there was a bed to sleep on, most of them would be in this position asking for trouble. Moreover, if they didn't take off their soft armor, the room would be adjacent to or facing the old god of Sword Li. It was easy to imagine how afraid His Royal Highness was of death. Although the majestic Tao Qinji was dressed in a civil official's robe, it was difficult to conceal the aura of a general that had crawled out from a pile of bones. The study room was simple and crude. Many of the antiques and treasures that had been purposely left behind by the previous city magistrate were all pawned on the first day. All the gold and silver that had been obtained were distributed to the remaining city magistrate soldiers, while the civil officials and scribes did not receive a single copper coin. During this period, there was an official who took advantage of the convenience of his duties to secretly embezzle 200 taels of silver. After he was arrested, 30 elite soldiers of the city magistrate's mansion broke in. His head dripping with blood was hung on the flagpole of the martial arts field. This official had some background. His clansmen reported this matter to the deputy head of Dragon Waste Province's county magistrate. Tao Qinji did not bring his family with him, but this former fourth-rank Chongsu general was not a rigid man. Every few days, he would spend money to invite the most popular women of the city's brothels to his manor. No matter how much money was spent, he would not skimp on it. At first, some of the brothels did not dare to accept and were forced into his hands. After a period of fear and trepidation, the city overseer did not show any signs of settling accounts. Only then did they feel relieved. In addition, the heroic deeds of this Chongsu general continued to spread throughout the city. Gradually, Tao Qinji's reputation rose like a tide. Many brothels took the initiative to send their top courtesans to the city overseer's manor. Originally, they could earn dozens of taels of silver a night, but when they opened their mouths and asked for only dozens of taels of silver, Tao Qinji did not fuss over the details. He appeared more and more like a general, making the people of the city who were originally afraid that thieves would come and clean. In the continuous drizzle, Tao Qinji sat in the empty and shabby study, reading a military book by the light of a lamp. A trusted officer from Gusai province stood at the door and respectfully said, "Princess Hongyan of Jade Toad province has come to visit in the rain." Tao Qinji frowned and said indifferently, "If she enters the manor alone, I will not see her." A plump woman with a mink hair covering her forehead appeared beside the officer. Behind her was an old man dressed in brocade with his hands in his sleeves. She stepped over the threshold and placed her hands on the jade belt bestowed by His Majesty the Emperor. She said sweetly, "Oh, General Tao, you put on such airs. Or are you afraid of attracting gossip?" The extraordinarily valiant city overseer frowned and put down the book. He was not the least bit afraid of this imperial relative with a xianbei hairstyle on her waist. He sneered and said, "Princess Hongyan's beauty is known far and wide. She likes to keep male companions. A mere city overseer like me would not dare to enter her eyes. The old man in brocade snorted coldly. The corner of Tao Qinji's mouth curled up and his eyes were full of disdain. Princess Hongyan, who was holding a satin umbrella and a mink hair covering her forehead, laughed wantonly. She waved her hand to indicate that the old retainer of the county overseer should not mind. She stared at the rude and unreasonable middle-aged city overseer and said with her charming eyes, "General Tao, I originally did not want to enter this manor. I have to kill people every day and the yin qi is too strong. I am not as vigorous as General Tao and I am afraid that I will be haunted by ghosts." "It is almost Qingming festival," Tao Qinji said coldly. "If Princess Hongyan does not have any important matters to attend to, please forgive me for not seeing you out." This plump beauty, who was one of the wealthiest in Jade Toad State, was offended several times, but she still did not show any anger. She smiled and said, "All right, I won't beat around the bush with General Tao. Someone asked me to pass on a message to General Tao. 8 words, tomorrow morning, don't go out." Tao Qinji, who felt that he was being teased, was furious. The study was filled with murderous intent. The brocade-clothed old man's sleeves billowed like waves. The princess patted her cheeks lightly and said apologetically, "Oh my stupid mouth. What nonsense did I say? I was wrong. It is indeed 8 words, Qingming festival tomorrow, do not go out. General Tao, please believe me. I do not dare to disobey the person who said these 8 words." Tao Qinji turned around and said coldly without any fluctuation in his tone, "I will not see you out." Princess Hongyan swung the silk satin umbrella that was soaked in rainwater and said with a smile, "This princess will remember Lord Tao's hospitality today." Under the eaves of the courtyard, the brocade-clothed old man, whose martial power was definitely higher than Tao Qinji's, took the umbrella and opened it. He tilted it towards his mistress and said angrily, "Princess, why don't you let me teach this insignificant 5th-rank city overseer a lesson?" The mink-hair covering woman, who was not in a hurry to step into the rain, reached out her hand to catch the rain. She did not answer the question but said with blurred eyes, "Why is God crying?" Early in the morning 2 days later, the rain was getting heavier and the road was full of mud. City Overseer Tao Qinji led 30 riders out of the city to visit the grave of a comrade who had died in battle. It was raining heavily on Qingming festival. It was not easy to burn paper, but it was easier to die. Chapter 4:17. The Beimang border was similar to the Han customs of the Liang dynasty, especially after the refugees of the 8 kingdoms had moved in. In fact, there was not much difference. On the double ninth festival, they would plant dogwood, enjoy osmanthus and eat mooncakes. On New Year's Eve, they would set off firecrackers, and today's tomb sweeping day. The men of the family, regardless of age, would bring wine, food, fruits, and paper money to the graves. They would burn the paper money and cover the old graves with new soil. As the younger generation, the children and youths would fold tender yellow twigs and stick them in the graves. After burning the paper money, they would kowtow and pay respects to their ancestors, and pray for some good fortune before they could return. There was no fixed time to visit the graves during tomb sweeping day. It could be sooner or later. However, because of the heavy rain in Beimang, most of the graves were on the outskirts of the city and were not close by. Many of the common people were worried about their clothes and hoped that they could wait until the rain lessened before going to visit the graves. Therefore, the departure of the 31 cavalrymen from Beimang was very eye-catching. The limestone streets of Beimang were slanted from the middle to the sides. Normally, it was not easy to notice them, but during the heavy rain, when the rainwater slid into the gutters, one would be able to see them clearly. The sound of the hooves of the 30 armored cavalrymen pounded heavily on the hearts of the people on both sides of the street. Connecting this Commandant General's bloody deeds of killing more than 100 enemies on the border battlefield and killing people and drinking to his heart's content every day in the Baimang Manor, the common people felt more and more that they could rely on this Baimang Manor, who had a military background. Wei Feng was a merchant, and no matter how much money a merchant made, his status was still inferior to that of a landowning household. Although Wei Feng was one of the few wealthy people in Baimang, his manor was still 2 streets away from the Baimang Manor. Fortunately, the Wei Manor was on the main road of the city, quiet amidst the commotion. It just so happened that one could see the 31 cavalrymen galloping out of the city. Leading them was the armored Tao Qinji, who did not conform to the official system. His steed was a rare Fergana horse, light gold in color. Fergana horses were already exceptionally precious, and this fine steed, bestowed by the Gusai Prefecture, was the most outstanding of its kind. It was exceptionally vigorous, making the rich in the city drool and the common people fearful at the sight of it. The city overseer, Tao Qinji, took the lead, his eyes looking straight ahead. Naturally, he did not notice that under the high walls of the Wei Mansion's main gate, there was a young man with a saber on his back, squatting down. A servant girl with a delicate body and charming eyes was holding an umbrella for him. That young master was squatting in a corner with his knees bent, his face facing the south. With great difficulty, he had burned several handfuls of yellow paper money. Probably because he had done his best, he put the remaining handfuls of yellow paper money back into his bosom. The pretty and pitiful maid reminded him in a low voice, "Young Master Su, it's not good to put the paper money for the ancestors into the arms of the living. Shall I help you keep it?" Su Fengnian stood up and saw that her left shoulder was soaked. He used his fingers to push the mahogany umbrella towards the maidservant. He crossed his hands and placed them on his abdomen. He looked at the armored horses galloping away in the rain. He smiled but didn't say anything. He just shook his head. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the small umbrella was quietly tilting towards his head. He took the umbrella, feeling both angry and amused, and held it over the 2 people's heads. The maidservant, Chun Nong, raised her small head and blinked her pair of eyes that were naturally overflowing with spring. Su Fengnian rubbed her head and smiled. "I'll send you into the mansion first. Later, I'll go out for a walk. You don't have to follow me. This time, I'm leaving the city and I don't know when I'll be back. If we get to the town god's temple and the rain isn't as heavy as it is now, I'll help you and Choshue bring a tray of Zhoji's soup dumplings." The young maidservant, who had just started to grow, said considerately, "It's just these roads. I'll be there in a few steps. Young master, you can just go straight for a stroll." Su Fengnian narrowed his extremely beautiful red phoenix eyes and pretended to be wronged. He teased, "I wanted to say a few more words to a certain young lady, but she doesn't understand the situation." At that moment, the young lady seemed to have been struck by lightning. Her entire heart and liver trembled. She was so infatuated that she couldn't speak. She could only tilt up her small chin, which would suddenly sharpen if she was a few years older, and look at the young master with an intoxicating smile in front of her. Some first awakenings of love were always inexplicable. Perhaps most of them would be blown away by the rain and wind. However, the scene at this moment caught the young lady unprepared. Su Fengnian smiled as he sent her into the Wei Manor. After entering the door, the young lady didn't immediately walk into the deep courtyard. Instead, she stood where she was and looked at his slender back. She looked carefully and saw that when he held the umbrella and walked through the curtain of rain outside the eaves, his figure paused. It was as if he was looking through the umbrella at the sky that was like a large ink-stained inkstone. Su Fengnian held the umbrella and walked slowly on the street. His shoes and socks had long been soaked when he burned the paper. His Royal Highness in Beiliang stepped on the stone slabs in Baimang City to kill the 31 Iron Horsemen, including the mayor. The truth was that it was a bit cold. It was similar to the damned weather that made people shrink their necks and curse. The fish dragon gang had paid a huge price to send the goods into the city. In fact, after they handed over the goods to Wei Feng, they had nothing to do with it. However, they still stayed until today and agreed to leave the city in the afternoon. In the past few days, Wei Feng had done his part as a host. He had asked several stewards to take these country bumpkins who had never seen the world to experience the taste of gentleness. This alone cost more than 3,000 taels of silver. In the eyes of the fish dragon gang, this was a shocking extravagance. Even they felt a little embarrassed when they were eating, drinking, whoring, and gambling. Only Lu Narong, who had suffered a lot, remained silent. She didn't tell anyone about the death of their guest, Gong Sun Yang. The young Wang Dashi was the only idiot who had always stayed in the Wei mansion. In addition to practicing martial arts, he also memorized the incantation. The day before yesterday, young Master Su taught him a sword move. Unfortunately, he couldn't learn it no matter how hard he tried. Fortunately, young Master Su seemed to be a strange master who was not afraid of his disciples' stupidity, but was afraid of his cleverness. Wang Dashi didn't feel burdened. Since young Master Su had kindly taught him, he would learn it honestly. He only knew that the move was called 3-Jin. Just by hearing the name, Wang Dashi was quite fond of it and felt a sense of closeness. It was not like the tricks that the masters in the fish dragon gang used to scare people. Who were they trying to scare? Anyway, even Wang Dashi didn't believe that these moves could be that powerful. Su Fengnian stopped and turned to look at the unexpected person. He said calmly, "You're going to visit Gong Sun Yang's grave." Lu Narong, who looked miserable and haggard, nodded and then said word by word in a deep voice, "Or I won't let you visit the grave." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "I'll just walk around the city. I won't go to Gong Sun Yang's grave to say anything. I really have nothing to say." "Miss Lu, you worry too much." Lu Narong strode forward, leaving Su Fengnian far behind. This new enemy of fate left the city one after the other. Lu Narong went southwest, while Su Fengnian went southeast. It was raining heavily, and the sky was as dark as night. The official road was muddy and difficult to walk on. Su Fengnian's boots were covered in yellow mud. After walking neither fast nor slow for the time it took for 3 incense sticks to burn, he did not come across a single gravedigger. Su Fengnian exhaled a mouthful of fog and closed his umbrella with a bang, allowing the soybean-sized raindrops to smash against his body. He began to run wildly, but he did not run straight along the official road. Instead, he ran in an extremely large circle. Every time his toes stepped on the ground, a mud hole would be created in the ground and countless splashes of water would splash up. If an ordinary person was watching, they would only see a green shadow flash past, leaving behind a string of water puddles that were 6 zhang apart like blooming lotuses. It was like using a pebble to float across a lake. City Overseer Tao Qianji came to a lonely grave mound. Lying inside was a comrade of the Gusi border army who didn't have any official title. When he died, he was only a sergeant. This old fellow entered the border army's infantry battalion at the age of 16 and had been in the army for more than 30 years. He spent 2 years relying on luck to kill a northern Liang cavalry to rise to the rank of sergeant. Then, he wasted an entire 20 years in this position as a sergeant, going back and forth on the battlefield, never killing many people. However, it was strange to say that after all these years of dealing with the King of Hell under a hail of arrows, he still didn't die. The old sergeant had only led a dozen or so brats under his command, and now, only 4 of them were left. Tao Qianji was one of them. He had been promoted from an infantry soldier to a cavalry soldier, rising rapidly to the position of commandant general. One of them had become a 5th-rank infantry commander, one of them had become one of the few outstanding sentries in the Gusi border army, and the last one had an even more illustrious official position than Tao Qianji, vaguely about to become a pillar of the northern Mang royal court. The old corporal was greedy for life and afraid of death. What he taught these new soldiers was not how to kill the enemy bravely, but how to fight a war with a cowardly attitude. For example, he taught them how to play dead without leaving a trace, how to steal the valuables from corpses, and how to behead the enemy to gain military merits. But it was precisely this old ruffian, who was about to receive a salary and retire at home, who had died in a battle without warning. He had blocked a fierce Bailiang saber for his subordinate, and his entire back had been slashed open. He was just an ordinary foot soldier of the Baimang border army, and the soft armor he wore was completely useless against the sharp Bailiang saber. Tao Qianji and a few of his peers were still young at that time. They held the dying corporal in their arms and did not understand why this old man, who was addicted to alcohol, said that it would be better to die on the battlefield rather than in a coffin. Before the corporal died, he nagged and nagged. He was not a man of integrity, but he was in so much pain that tears and snot flowed down his face. In the end, he said, "It really King hurts." 30 personal guards from Gusai neatly dismounted from their horses and stood in the distance. 2 of them took off their backpacks. One of them took out a few bottles of good wine that the general had specially bought with a lot of money. There was nothing else but wine. The other took out a large stack of paper money wrapped in oil paper and handed it to the general along with the fire starter. After that, he opened an umbrella to block the wind and rain. Chapter 4:18. Tao Qianji squatted on the grave mound and smashed a wine bottle with his fist. 6 or 7 bottles of expensive soju from Gangnam-do in the Liang dynasty flowed freely into Baimang and seeped into the mud in front of the grave along with the rainwater. Tao Qianji flicked the tongs used in the army and ignited the yellow paper. He muttered to himself, "Old man, you don't have much ability, but you taught us how to survive. At that time, if you didn't say that it was useless for you to accumulate military merits and gave those 2 heads to Dong Zhuo, this guy wouldn't have the glory he has today even if he was beaten to death. If you didn't block a knife for me in the end, I wouldn't have been able to get you good wine. That Dong Zhuo is a stone in a latrine pit. He has a stinky and stubborn temper. When we were drinking, he let it slip that he didn't have the face to see you, an old man who is as prideful as he is. I didn't think as much as he did. Since we're already in Luqing, it wouldn't be right if we didn't bring you a few bottles of good wine that you've coveted for a long time during the Qingming festival. You're a narrow-minded old man. When I stole your wine, it was like stealing your wife. Oh, I forgot. You've been single your whole life. If you're still alive today, old man, you only need to tell us who you like. Dong Zhuo and I won't be afraid of anyone. We'll help you snatch it." Tao Qianji held the burning yellow paper in his hand, completely ignoring the burning pain. He said softly, "Before I came to visit your grave, I killed a Bailiang soldier. I chopped off his limbs with my own hands with a Bailiang knife. I know you're a coward and I'm afraid you won't be able to sleep well, so I didn't bring him to your grave to disturb you. Old man, let me tell you. In fact, the Bailiang cavalry only thought we were invincible when we were young. It was mainly because we were scared by you. Every time before we went to the battlefield, we would see you trembling and your legs shaking just by hearing the hooves of the horses. Even Dong Zhuo and I were scared to death. Now that we've killed so many Bailiang soldiers, it's actually not that big of a deal. When we came to Luqing, we brought 4 cages of Bailiang soldiers. Many of them were begging for mercy like dogs. Some of them were worse than dogs when they drew their swords against their fellow soldiers in order to survive. After the yellow paper was burned, Tao Qianji clapped his hands to disperse the ashes. He slowly got up and said, "I won't keep you from drinking." The 31 cavalry silently mounted. Tao Qianji. Tao Qianji's. Tao Qianji. Of Tao Qianji. Tao Qianji nodded and said with a smile, "I thought those parasites in the imperial family's sauce jar would take the opportunity of my demotion to come here and clamor to beat a drowning dog. It seems that I overestimated their courage." The captain sneered, what kind of brave soldiers can these embroidered pillows wearing silver armor and carrying silver swords produce? Even if there were 100 of them, they would only be stuffed between our teeth. Tao Qianji raised his head to look at the gray sky. The rain showed no signs of abating. He withdrew his gaze and said calmly, "Return to the city." The sound of thunder, rain, and horse hooves. One cavalryman followed the other. They rushed out of the 2 to 3 miles long muddy path near the burial mound and were about to turn into the official road. Tao Qianji's pupils shrank. A trace of ruthlessness flashed through his eyes. He raised his hand and the 30 cavalrymen behind him stopped instantly. Normally, the official road could allow 4 cavalrymen to ride side by side. But after the heavy rain, it was full of potholes. 3 cavalrymen riding side by side was the limit. If the cavalrymen wanted to maximize the impact of their charge, 2 cavalrymen would be the best. On the official road splashed with water droplets, a young man with a saber stood with an umbrella. There was no way the military officer who was proficient in scouting could investigate every single blade of grass and tree within a range of 3 li in such a short amount of time. Together with the fact that the heavy rain had erased all traces of footprints, he could only guarantee that there was a group of around 10 people. Towards this fish that slipped through the net, the Northern Mang's 6th-rank military officer berated, "Who goes there?" The man with the saber didn't speak. He just slowly closed the umbrella and inserted the tip of the umbrella into the mud beside him. Tao Qianji was indeed a decisive general. When he saw the young man's action, the corner of his mouth twitched. He said calmly, "2 teams, charge. Kill without mercy." The 2 cavalrymen rushed out side by side. The horses under the cavalrymen were strong. They were good horses that were familiar with war. When they ran, they showed a very dynamic visual beauty. When the rain washed over them, their mane trembled with the rhythm of their muscles. For a moment, the sound of the horses' hooves covered the sound of the rain. The 2 unsheathed sabers were as clear as snow. The blades were wider and thicker than the Bailiang sabers. They were similar in length but slightly less sharp. The curvature was bigger. Experienced soldiers had to match the running speed of their mounts when they attacked. The road conditions caused the horses to bump up and down. The 2 cavalrymen had thick arms. They were originally brave spearmen of the Gusi border army. When they attacked with their sabers, they were imposing. If they weren't elites, they wouldn't be qualified to be brought to Luqing by Tao Qianji as his personal guards. The 2 tall horses attacked at the same time. The young man who was sandwiched in the middle didn't move his feet. His body turned like a top and drew an arc. He leaned back toward the horse whose saber missed. He stepped back with his right foot and pressed his back against the horse's side. Then, with a loud bang, the man and the horse, which weighed nearly 2,000 pounds, were knocked out. The 4 hooves were suspended in the air. They fell down 60 or 70 feet away. The cavalryman on the horse fainted on the spot. Leaning against the back of a horse, the young saberman leaped forward with the help of the rebound force. He took a few steps forward at lightning speed and punched the muscular buttocks of the second war horse. Blood splashed out in an instant. The war horse whined and spun half a circle in the air before landing in the mud outside the official road. The cavalryman was indeed brave. He bounced off the back of the horse and slid a long distance in the mud. He wiped his face with a ferocious expression. The 2 leading cavalrymen of the remaining 8 cavalrymen, who had been charging in 2 rows, were fearless in the face of this swordsman's cold-blooded methods. Based on the experience they had gained from countless battles on the battlefield, they once again cooperated with their comrades to strike with their swords. The young man didn't retreat. Instead, he moved forward. His body was like a swimming fish. He slid through the curtain of rain and lowered his head to avoid the saber. He ignored the cavalryman on his right. His left hand was glued to the arm of another cavalryman. His feet were lifted off the ground by the momentum of the horse's charge. He quickly flipped onto the horse and sat behind the cavalryman. He pressed his hands on the cavalryman's head and twisted it in a crisscross manner. The crooked arm snake stuck to the chest of the corpse. With a twist, the corpse that weighed 140 or 50 pounds was thrown backward. It hit the head of the cavalryman who was chasing behind him. The head of the horse that had fought with its master for many years was smashed. Its front hooves were bent and it crashed into the mud. The cavalryman rolled a few times. The fourth cavalryman was skilled in horsemanship. Not only did he avoid the fallen horse, he also bent down and reached out to pull up the first man. The latter jumped onto the horse without hesitation. The two men rode together and continued to pursue without fear of death. It was obvious that Bimang's soldiers were brave and good at fighting. Chapter 4:19. The machete man had no intention of engaging in a horse battle with the remaining city riders. The mount suddenly neighed in pain, its four legs seemed to have been crushed by a heavy weight. The machete man on the back of the horse soared into the air, turning around in midair and stabbing at the two riders. The two riders only saw a shadow sweep over their heads. Their heads were cut off by a sweep of his leg. Their bodies rolled into the yellow mud in the distance. The handsome swordsman, who had never drawn his saber, stood on the back of a galloping horse. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, and his body shot toward another cavalryman like an arrow leaving the bowstring. After a few leaps, he kicked the cavalryman in the chest, and the cavalryman in armor was brutally crushed to death. The cavalryman was separated from his horse one by one, and his internal organs were shattered into a mess. Other than the second rider, the rest of the 10 riders were all dead. The frightened lieutenant asked in a low voice, "General, should we send someone to report to the city?" Tao Qianji nodded. He leaned over and patted his horse's head. He said calmly, "You 20 riders will scatter and return to the city. Don't worry about me." The lieutenant's eyes turned red. He called out in a hoarse voice, "General." Tao Qianji smiled. "How can I die so easily? I also don't want to die here." After Tao Qianji finished speaking, he coldly said, "Listen, return to the city." After a brief hesitation, the 20 riders left with hatred in their hearts. The young machete man didn't stop them. He jumped off his horse and onto the official road. Obviously, he only had eyes for Tao Qianji today. Tao Qianji was sitting high on his pale golden Fergana horse, with one hand holding the reins and the other holding the broadsword. With a calm demeanor he asked in a loud voice, "Did that puppy Murong Zhangtai send you to assassinate me?" The assassin standing on the road didn't say a word. He just walked toward the remaining city magistrate. Tao Qianji sneered. Could it be Princess Hongyan's new male companion? How did this little girl's standards suddenly increase so much? Interesting. Tao Qianji, who was wearing an excellent black armor, jumped off his horse and patted his horse's neck. The psychic Fergana horse trotted away reluctantly. It neighed and paced back and forth a few dozen feet away, impatiently stomping its hooves. The burly Tao Qianji seemed to know that the assassin would not reveal anything, so he did not waste any more words. The moment he drew his broadsword, killing intent filled the air. As the two sides charged at each other, the official road was immediately filled with murderous aura. It was actually far more imposing than when the young assassin had clashed with the 10 riders. Tao Qianji's saber technique was simple and unadorned, simple and quick. It was a killing move that he had honed during his military life. There was absolutely no sloppiness in his movements. The two men, who were determined to leave behind one of their corpses, collided with a loud bang. The Mang's saber hacked down on the short saber's scabbard. Obviously the Mang's saber did not have the extravagant hope of killing the enemy in one strike, because it had accumulated 70 to 80% of its strength. Therefore, the saber edge slid down with unparalleled swiftness. It was aimed at the young swordsman's abdomen. The young swordsman did not draw his saber. He only used the scabbard to block the attack. He did not look at the tip of the saber that was about to touch his abdomen. He twisted his right wrist, and the short saber in the scabbard left his hand. It spun in front of him and formed a perfect circle without any gaps. When the raindrops that covered the sky and earth hit the circle, they were rebounded. Tao Qianji narrowed his eyes. The tip of his saber did not shrink back. He suddenly exerted force, trying to pierce through the circle that was no thicker than the scabbard. The tip of the Mang's saber rubbed against the simple scabbard, producing an ear-piercing sound of metal and stone colliding. Tao Qianji's qi flowed like a spring, layer upon layer. In an instant, he multiplied his arm strength several times, and the tip of his saber blossomed with a bright white light. The young assassin retreated. He did not see how he touched the scabbard, but he was pulled back. His right hand swept out in a subtle angle, and the scabbard in his hand spun rapidly around the tip of the saber like a viper. Then, it climbed up and was about to chop off Tao Qianji's wrist that was holding the saber. Tao Qianji pulled back his hand slightly and snorted coldly. Where did this unorthodox saber technique come from? Insignificant skill. This cavalry general, who had always been famous for his horse battles in Gusai, swung his sleeves. His Mang saber successfully knocked away the strange scabbard that was still spinning incessantly. Seeing that the person in front of him was unarmed, his Mang saber shone brightly and was about to break the silent assassin's chest. However, when Tao Qianji saw the assassin's right arm pull back and then pull back, he became vigilant. He used the 1,000-pound fall. His feet sank deep into the mud, and he lowered his head to avoid the scabbard that was about to cut his head. Tao Qianji, who had dodged the attack, pulled out the tip of his foot, splashing a large piece of mud as he pounced on the young swordsman with endless strange techniques. Both of his hands gripped the hilt of his saber. His robust body leaned forward, and with a strong momentum, he crashed into the young swordsman with his saber. The scabbard did not cut off Tao Qianji's neck, but it did not fall to the ground. Instead, it circled in the air like a swallow and came to the assassin's left hand. With a flick of his finger, the scabbard left his hand in the blink of an eye and stabbed toward Tao Qianji. Somewhat aggrieved, Tao Qianji twisted his Mang saber and rolled his body along with it. He stood still on the side of the official road and stared at the assassin who had accurately controlled the scabbard to kill with a flick of his finger. He laughed sinisterly. It's actually the flying saber of the Jianghu Boers. Let me see how long you can do it in one go. The scabbard was like a nimble swallow circling around the beam. Every time the swordsman flicked his finger, it would circle incessantly. Neither side gave the other a chance to rest. The white light of the Mang saber was like a firefly. Tao Qianji rolled his saber and moved away. The scabbard circled in the air like a swallow, constantly colliding with the Mang saber. In contrast, Tao Qianji, who was full of murderous intent, was unable to restrain his anger. The rolling momentum of his saber was terrifying. The assassin, who was none other than Beiliang and His Royal Highness, was much more leisurely. On the official road, he used the flying saber that he had stolen from Xiao Cheng outside the Tumbling Horse Pass and the Fish Dragon Gang's master's three-cupped fists. He had mastered it thoroughly and was strolling leisurely. He seemed to know when to advance and when to retreat. He already had a somewhat lofty Grand Master's demeanor. There was once an old man wearing a sheepskin fur coat who made an immortal kneel with an umbrella. The scabbard of the Spring Thunder had failed several times against Tao Qianji's armor. Su Fengnian's eyes suddenly became fierce. The sword intent in his chest suddenly poured out like a river. He unbelievably used the flying saber's scabbard to perform the embryonic form of the sword Qi rolling dragon wall. The scabbard closed and the Spring Thunder finally returned to Su Fengnian's right hand. Tao Qianji knelt on one knee. Beimang's saber was stabbed into the ground. Thick blood flowed from his wrist along the blade. His armor was shattered. His whole body was badly mutilated. There were even some wounds where his bones could be seen. Tao Qianji raised his head and grinned. Boy, are you still not going to pull out my saber? Su Fengnian thought for a while. The corner of his mouth pulled up into a cruel smile. Then, he tirelessly performed the sword chi rolling dragon wall 10 times. After 3 times, Tao Qianji's armor was completely broken. After 6 times, only his right arm holding the saber was still intact. After 10 times of the sword chi rolling dragon wall, Tao Qianji's body was already smashed. He knelt on the ground with his hands on the hilt of his saber. Su Fengnian slowly walked forward and mercilessly used the Spring Thunder's scabbard to send him flying. The Fergana horse galloped over. Su Fengnian sneered and leaned to the side. He gently jumped up and wrapped his arms around the horse's neck. He bent his knees and leaned his body back. Taking advantage of the momentum, he flipped the warhorse over. It collapsed on the official road with a loud crash. The Fergana horse's entire back was smashed and it died on the spot. From beginning to end, Su Fengnian didn't waste a single word with this Beimang city magistrate, who should have had a bright future ahead of him. Su Fengnian stood up and allowed the rain to wash away the mud on his back. He repositioned the Spring Thunder saber and pulled out the umbrella. Facing the direction of Beimang, he pulled out the handful of yellow papers that he had deliberately left at the foot of the wall of the Wei residence and gently scattered them into the air. A 7,000-word chapter, please receive a red ticket. Chapter 420. Walking in the heavy mud with an umbrella, Su Fengnian slowly tore off a piece of root mask and put it in his pocket. Among the 6 masks meticulously made by the southern Xinjiang witch Xu Xiu, there were 3 levels of air passage, root formation, and spirit. The air passage mask could be smeared and removed at will, but it would take a lot of energy to use the root formation mask. According to Xu Xiu, the mask could only be used once. As for the reincarnation mask, which changed one's foundation, one could not restore one's original appearance even if one was disfigured. The root formation mask could be used 3 to 4 times. Su Fengnian did not want any men of sacrifice to follow him. He left a puppet in Beiliang Palace as a smokescreen. After entering Beimang, he would inevitably become a thrifty miser. He would kill 6 second-rank martial artists, 3 Vajra martial artists, and 1 Finger Xian martial artist. This was one of the goals that Su Fengnian had set for himself in northern Mang. The reason why he chose Left City in Dragon Waste Province as the base of northern Mang was mostly because of Tao Qianji, the city overseer. This former commander-in-chief who had been demoted in public but was actually promoted in private was placed in Left City by northern Mang royal court. How could it be as simple as keeping Tao Qianji away from the grudges between him and the several members of the royal family of the younger generation? Northern Mang Empress sat on the throne of the royal court and cast covetous eyes on the Liang dynasty that had unified the spring and autumn period. She was truly acting as if she was sitting in the north and facing the south. Who dared to say that Tao Qianji was not a key pawn that she used to target northern Liang Yuzhou? Although this person was only a martial artist who was close to second rank, Tao Qianji was far more than ordinary in terms of rallying the people at the border and the threat to Beiliang in the future. When he talked with Su Xiao secretly, he mentioned this new city magistrate. He said that killing Tao Qianji was equivalent to killing 3,000 Beimang soldiers. At this time, Tao Qianji, who liked to torture and kill Beiliang soldiers every day, had not yet stabilized his foundation. How could Su Fengnian not make a move? Tao Qianji could be considered to have died at a good time. Although Su Fengnian had taken off his mask and the simple and unadorned Spring Thunder saber at his waist was not very conspicuous, the 20 or so armored bodyguards had fled back to Yu City. Even if they were like a group of dragons without a leader, with Tao Qianji's achievements in managing the army, they were bound to set up an inescapable net. Su Fengnian had been strolling around the city for the past 2 days and had already thoroughly studied the layout of Yu City. Instead of going through the city gate, he chose a section of the city wall where there were few signs of human habitation and climbed up the wall like an ant attacking a city. The rain was still pouring down heavily. He climbed to the top of the city wall and leaped over it, landing lightly at the base of the inner city wall. He walked through the deserted alleys and narrow streets. Other than Tao Qinji, there were still other experts in Yu City. Small groups of cavalry roamed in different directions. The martial law was cleverly enforced, loose on the outside but tight on the inside. Su Fengnian was worthy of being called an expert when it came to this level of patrolling and searching. Naturally, he easily avoided them and even went to Zhou Ji's store to buy a tray of piping hot soup dumplings. From the time he left the Wei mansion to the time he returned, it had only been 3 hours. There was still an hour until lunchtime. The maidservant Chun Nong had been waiting in his room. When Su Fengnian pushed open the door, the bored girl was leaning against the windowsill in a daze and did not notice him. It was only when she smelled the aroma that she suddenly turned her head. She saw young Master Su, drenched in sweat, holding a tray of food in his hands. Her eyes reddened for no reason. Su Fengnian had no choice but to interrupt her brewing emotions. He teased, "Don't think too highly of yourself. I bought it along the way. Take it and eat it with Choshui. As for changing clothes, I'll do it myself. I don't want to spoil your appetite." Are you crying? Don't. If outsiders see me, they'll think I'm worse than a beast. I want to take a tray of soup dumplings and elope with you back to Bailiang. The young maidservant sniffled. Seeing young Master Su's determined expression, she hesitated for a moment before giving in to the gluttonous bug in her stomach. She carefully took the soup dumplings and walked to the doorstep. She glanced back and smiled charmingly. Su Fengnian waved his hand and waited for her to trot far away before locking the door. He took off the spring thunder and placed it on the table. He took out the tightly wrapped knife manual and a stack of dough. He did not take off the silk armor that was warm in winter and cool in summer. He changed into a clean and comfortable scholar's robe and put away his personal belongings. He could really be considered to be alone in the world. Chun Nong must have eaten the soup dumplings carelessly. She was dragged back by the ear by Choshui, who was more sensible. She helped young Master Su with his hair. Chun Nong kept throwing meaningful glances at Sister Choshui. The latter quietly sighed and asked, "Young Master Su, are you leaving Luqing to return to Lingzhou today?" Su Fengnian nodded and went straight to the point. "Uncle Wei's original intention was for the two of you to return to Lingzhou with me. However, there's a saying. If a man doesn't have a career, how can he start a family?" Turning his head, he saw the two maidservants looking at each other. They were very cute. Su Fengnian laughed and said, "You really believe me? I'm just poor and can't afford to raise the two of you. I want to make a few more trips to Beimang and earn some money before bringing the two of you back to Lingzhou in a grand manner." Chun Nong, who was combing Su Fengnian's hair, timidly said, "Chun Nong and Sister Chushui can play women's and zither. It's fine even if we don't need young Master Su's support." Choshui's thoughts were much more meticulous and mature. She quietly shook her head at Chun Nong. The latter's eyes were wet like a broken dam. She was like a pool of water that had been wrinkled by the spring breeze. She was full of affection, but she obediently bit her lips and did not cry out loud. Of course, Su Fengnian would not really bring the two maidservants back to Bailiang. Even if he used his identity as a disciple of the military supervisor's mansion, it was not suitable. Furthermore, his real identity was like a lightning pool. If he stepped into it carelessly, he would easily be crushed. The two delicate 10 golden lotuses were best grown in such a quiet environment. If they were transplanted into a turbulent river, they would only die early. During the last lunch in Luqing, the most eye-catching dish was actually a fried snail with ginger and pepper. Qingming's snail, as fat as a goose, was a pile of green on the white jade plate. It was a pity that the members of the Fish Dragon gang were a group of boorish men. They only recognized pigs, cows, and sheep as meat dishes. They did not know how difficult it was to find these seasonal snails from the muddy ponds and streams in Jiangnan and transport them alive to Beimang. Fortunately, there was a roasted whole lamb at every table, which made the fish dragon gang feel greasy. Today, Lu Nerong had said that they were not allowed to drink, which was a bit of a fly in the ointment. However, after Xiao Bangzhu and foreign guest Gong Sun left, Miss Lu became more and more at ease. Gradually, she became more and more independent. The members of the fish dragon gang were sincerely convinced. The tears on Chen Nong's cheeks disappeared, but she was in low spirits. On the other hand, Chu Shui was still graceful and considerate. She stood beside Su Fingnian, picked out the meat of the snails with a bamboo stick, and put them on the plate one by one. The old fox Wei Feng's generosity had already won the favor of the fish dragon gang. They knew that Grandpa Wei was rich and powerful, and he was a tycoon who had a firm foothold in Beimang. Naturally, he was arrogant. Otherwise, many people would want to recognize him as their godfather. Originally, they did not know much about Grandpa Wei and did not like him. Now, it was obvious that he was related to Grandpa Wei. Many people completely lost the courage and interest to challenge Grandpa Wei. They began to think about how to be more friendly on the way back to Beiliang to make up for the estrangement from the northbound trip. Wei Feng smiled and said, "Nephew, fried snails are like old wine. Even the king of hell would not leave. This fried qingming is not a famous dish, but it's really hard to enjoy this taste in Beimang. You should try more." He should really treat him as his nephew. Wei Feng did not continue to be polite. He turned to Lu Nerong and said with a smile, "Miss Lu, Grandpa Wei still said that if you really want cash, you can immediately send it to the fish dragon gang's carriage. The Wei family also has some strong men who can help to escort. I dare not boast, but I can still squeeze out 20 men." Lu Nerong shook her head and said with a smile, "It's too rash to bring tens of thousands of taels of silver to the border. These days, the fish dragon gang has been treated with great care by Grandpa Wei. We have spent too much money, and we really don't have the face to let Grandpa Wei worry about us." Lu Nerong trusts Grandpa Wei, and also trusts the two banks in Beiliang and Beimang. Wei Feng stroked his beard and smiled without saying anything. Lu Nerong raised her cup. "Lu Nerong does not dare to drink too much, but I respect Grandpa Wei very much. I will toast Grandpa Wei 3 times on behalf of the fish dragon gang. Grandpa Wei, you can drink as much as you want." She drank 3 cups in a row without spilling a drop. Wei Feng took a sip and put down the cup, but no one thought that the old man was putting on airs. During this period of time, in addition to relying on the Wei family to live a happy life in the city, they also heard a lot of anecdotes about Grandpa Wei, which were more interesting than the stories told by the storytellers in the tea houses. The wind and rain stopped, and many people went out to visit the tombs on the street. When they came, there was a carriage with goods and a Gong Sun Lianqiu with a horn bow at his feet. When they left, there was only Su Fengnian with the spring thunder saber in the corner. Before getting on the carriage, he bowed to Wei Feng. This time, the latter did not pretend to be angry and accepted it calmly. Watching the fish dragon gang go farther and farther away, Wei Feng withdrew his gaze and glanced at the 2 maids, Chen Nong and Chu Shui, who were not able to send him off. He frowned and moved his lips slightly, but it was unclear what Grandpa Wei said. Passing by the city gate, Su Fengnian, who did not have the spring thunder saber, took the initiative to get off the carriage. The guards at the city gate opened the entry records and checked them carefully one by one. After confirming that there were no mistakes, they let them go. 100 steps away from the city, Su Fengnian, who was leading the horse, subconsciously looked at the city gate and saw a woman with a mink hair covering her forehead standing side by side with the well-dressed retainer. She made a fierce gesture of cutting her throat with a knife. Su Fengnian smiled. Are they all rushing to die on the Qingming festival? Stay in the city. Stay. At this moment, Su Fengnian had the impulse to draw his knife. A princess with a Xianbei hairstyle on her waist. Her head seemed to be no lighter than Tao Qianji's head.